Zimad Mizmar Shir Yom Shabbat Amid Mashiach Shir Yom Shabbat Mid Mashiach Shir Yom Shabbat. The whole world is waiting to sing this song of Shabbos. The whole wide world is waiting to sing this song of Shabbos. The whole world is waiting to sing this song of Shabbos. The whole wide world is waiting to sing this song of Shabbos. And I am also waiting to sing this song of Shabbat. I am waiting to sing this song of Shabbos. והוא ישמיענו ברחם שניס שניס בעיני כל החיים שניס שניס בעיני כל החיים יהיה יסלחם אלוהיקים הוא אלוהינו הוא אבינו Malkeinu hu Mashiachenu hu Elokeinu hu Avinu hu Malkeinu hu Mashiachenu Avehu Yashmi'enu v'racham Shenis Shenis v'yeinei kol echad Shenis, Shenis, v'yeinei kol echad Eli yishlachem Elokim This is to my first daughter, the pride of my heart and my soul, Miss Sweet Shamalin. Simlai choleinu, simlai choleinu, kimecha, kimanachnu lo. Oimozai timelai, timlai metziyai, v'kodai v'yameinu.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא.
All right, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study. This is Hakham Melech ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and this week we are in Parshat Vayechi, which is the last Parsha of the book of Genesis. So after that, we start already the book of Exodus. And that will last for, about, let's see, probably just maybe 3 months. It usually trails into around Passover time. So it's nice that the book of Exodus usually overlaps Passover. Of course, it depends when Passover comes. Let's figure this out. It's now the beginning of January. Maybe not quite January, March. Depends when Passover comes. Okay. At any rate, so we are going to start in Genesis chapter 47, verse 18. 47, 18? No, that must not be it. Where are we starting again? 47, 28, not 18. But I'll go back a little bit because we didn't finish last week, and we shall get a little bit of context. So let me turn off the music, set things up here, and let's get going. One second here. Set it up a bit differently. Window, Toyota. And off we go. Okay. So first, let me do a sound check. Can you guys all hear me okay? Jonathan, you can hear me all right? All right, awesome. If you need to say anything, just feel free to unmute yourself. I just keep everyone on mute because it's a bit hard otherwise. Okay, so let's try to go through this quickly until we get down to 28, where we're starting this week's parsha. I'll just try to basically read through it. Okay, so we'll start in the beginning of verse 47, and we'll just do translation and very, very quick commentary. Okay, so what yavo Yosef wa yaged li Pharaoh wa yomer avi wa ahai wa sonom u vi koram v'chol asher lahem ba'u me'eretz Kinaan wa hinom ba'eretz Goshen. So Yosef tells Pharaoh that his father and his brothers and all of their livestock came down and they're living in Goshen. Verse 2. Umikse how bakah hamisha enoshim wayasigem yasirem bifnei Pharaoh. And he took 5 of his brothers. Achiv could just mean relatives in general, but based on the previous sentence, Aviv, Achai probably means his brothers, so 5 of his brothers out of the 11, and brought him before Pharaoh. Verse 3. Wayomer Pharaoh el Echav ma ma'asechem wayomeru el Pharaoh ro'e son avodecha Gam anachnu, gam avotenu. So he tells Pharaoh that they tell Pharaoh that they are shepherds, and Pharaoh gets grossed out, but and is very happy to have him far away from him in Goshen, as exactly what Yosef told them to do, told his father to do. Why yomru et Paro lahur ba'aretz banu ki en mir'eh rason asher le'avodecha ki koved ha'ra'av be'eretz kin'an wa'ata yishvu na' avodecha be'eretz Goshen. So he's telling them there's no place for them to allow the flocks to graze where they are in Canaan, and so can they live in Goshen. Okay, verse 5. Wa yomer Paro el Yosef lemor avicha wa ahicha ahecha ba'u elecha. Okay, so Pharaoh acknowledges, or now he's speaking to Yosef. Okay, Eretz Yisrael nifonecha hi b'meitav ha'aretz shev et avicha wa et ahecha yishvu be'eretz Goshen wa'im yada'ta wa yesh bam anshe hayv v'samtam sarei mikneh al asher li. So Pharaoh, being the good management consultant dude, maybe he worked for what is it? Not Morgan Stanley. I don't know, Boston Consulting Group, or what's the other one? What's that other famous consulting group? I don't know. Not Morgan Stanley. Some stupid consulting group. I can't remember what it's called that everyone goes to. I remember I had a friend from, but can't hear on Facebook. Interesting. I don't know. It's possible that the internet, sometimes where I'm in a small village and the internet is not always good. So anyway, what's the name of that stupid consulting firm? Isn't it the one that Mitt Romney consulted for? Some other whore, I can't remember, it was Mitt Romney or another filthy prostitute. Consulting firms, that'll probably come up first. Top consulting firms in the US. No, not Bain. Oh, that was Mitt Romney. Yeah, there's another one. Alvarez and Marcel. Sounds very ethnic. I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Some stupid consulting firm. Any rate, so I had a friend from high school, and I was following her, her Facebook thingy, and she said, "Oh, my son just got a job with, we'll just say it's Bain and Company, and what's wonderful about that is he's such a warm and loving and caring person." And I'm just thinking to myself, if he were really a warm and loving and caring person, then he wouldn't be working for whatever that consulting firm was. We'll say Bain and Company. It's just sometimes amazing how selfish and how, to use a word that my friend Eric often uses, narcissistic some people are, that they can't even see past, their own children's or their own selfishness, and they think that this is a warm, loving, caring person who's working, who, he might be warm to his and loving to his mommy and daddy, but he's working for a company that basically rapes and pillages for a living. Anywho, that's my little commentary for now. Getting back to Genesis 6. So yeah, that's that. So Pharaoh says, hey, these people are obviously experts when it comes to livestock. So let's plug them into the matrix, taking care of livestock. Okay, verse 7. Wa Yahweh Yosef et Yaakov aviu u'ya'amidehu lifnei Pharaoh. Wa yivorech Yaakov et Paro. So Yaakov is giving a blessing to Pharaoh, which is interesting, not the other way around, right? So obviously Pharaoh understands that this is, some kind of family that has, I don't know, at least wisdom, maybe some kind of connection to God, right? Pharaoh says that there's no wiser than Yosef, and that's why he chose him after he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. So obviously, if Yaakov, or if he wants to accept the bracha from Yaakov, then obviously Pharaoh must have some kind of respect for Yosef and his family. I wonder if Yaakov charged $1,000 or $2,000 dollars or shekels for the bracha, that would really be in good Jewish tradition, wouldn't it now? Yomer Per'o El Yaakov Kama Yemei Shnei Hayecha. So he asks Pharaoh how old he is. I'm sorry, Pharaoh asks Yaakov how old he is, obviously seeing that he's an old man. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, as we'll see in this week's Parsha, it'll be another 17 years before he dies, right? I think Yaakov lived in Mitzrayim for 17 years. So if Yaakov dies at the age of, what was it, 135, I think he was. So it doesn't matter. We'll get to it. Then he's in his 120s or something like that. Let's say. All right, or 1-teens. He's a teenager, just a bright little teenager. Okay, verse 9. Yomer Yaakov Per'o Yemei Shnei Mihorai Shloshim. Oh, here we go. Shloshim u'ma'at shona מעט ורעים היו ימי שני חיי ולא השיגו את ימי שני חיי אבותיי ימי מגוריהם. So Yaakov says he is 30 ומאה שנה, he's 130 years old, and if he's going to die in another 17 years, that means he dies at 147, which is what we're going to see in this week's parsha. I am not mistaken. Okay, ויברך יעקב את פרעה ויצא מלפני פרעה. So Yaakov blesses Pharaoh. It doesn't say what the blessing is. I mean, what do you give this guy as a blessing? I mean, he's an idol worshiper. He thinks he's a god. He probably worships the sun god Ra. He's like taken all of the wealth of Egypt for himself. I mean, the guy's a complete a-hole, basically. What do you bless a guy like that? May you not go to hell. I wish you, that when you get down to the underworld and you have the book of the dead with you, that you follow it correctly so you don't end up in eternal damnation. I mean, the guy's a jerk, right? He happens to like Yosef, but he's objectively speaking a complete. I won't say the word. All right. I'm a get. Okay. All right, Jonathan. Good for you, man. The only way to study. All right. So, yeah. Why Yosef et avi wa'et ehaw וייתן להם אחוזה בארץ מצרים במיטב הארץ בארץ רעמסס כאשר סיווה פרעה. Okay, so in the land of Ramses, and we know a couple of things. We know later in this book of Exodus that the Israelites are going to be building the Arei Miskanot, usually understood as storage cities, although that's not really a word there's debate over what that word means, but they'll be building Ramses and Pitom. So of course Ramses is related to the sun god Ra, right? Let's see what the word Ramses means. I remember, but I used to remember, but I forgot. City in Egypt. Do we get an etymology for it? Proper name of a location, blah, 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 blah. Okay. I don't see it here. Anywho, so, and I'm not going to waste it, since it's not technically in our parsha, I'm not going to waste the time to track it down. Anyway, so they're in Ramses. So this just shows, obviously, since that Ramses is in the land of Goshen, right? Ramses and Pitom are in the land of Goshen, because that's where they're being settled. Okay, so Ramses is a city in the state of Goshen. Kasher Tziwat Ar'o, verse 12. 1. Yichalkel Yosef et Aviv Wa'eth How Wa'eth Kol Bet Aviv Lahem Lefi Taf. So Yosef took care of them. He set them up for life, basically, and gave them as much the fiat taf. So taf is babies or children, right? So in other words, he gave them enough food. He gave them enough food, or anything they want, specifically food, according to the needs of the size of their particular family. Okay, verse 13. Wa'alehem in chol ha'aras ki kaved ha'ra'av me'od wa tela Eretz Misraim wa Eretz Kinaan mifnei ha'ra'av. So yeah, the famine was pretty bad. Almost getting to the beginning of our parsha. Once we get to the beginning of our parsha, we'll delve in more detail. Okay. יוסף את כל הכסף הנמצא בארץ מצרים ובארץ כנען בשבר אשר הם שוברים ויובא יוסף את הכסף בית פרעה. So Yosef is well, shall I say he's you know, how could we put this? I guess the Jews are always accused of being in control of the money supply and being in control of things. And hey, it's true, baby. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. It's the truth, and we see it already at a very early age, right? So Joseph is basically in charge of running Egypt and bringing the money in for Pharaoh. ויאמר יוסף הבו מקדכם ואתנה לכם במקניכם עם אפס כסף. So if you run out of money, bring us your livestock. Okay, start selling your crap off, right? It's like when you go broke, what do? You have a garage sale, or you pop open your basement and start selling all your crap on eBay or something like that. So that's what we're down to here. Okay, ויביאו את מקניהם אל יוסף וייתן להם יוסף לחם. Basusim. So here we see that horses, right? So horses are native to the old world. Please. Sometimes people make the mistake that that Sus is associated with the New World because the Indians, what we like to call the Native Americans, ride around on horses. So I've heard people say, "Oh, the horse is native to the New World." So just clearing that up. It's not. You see here horses mentioned. ובקנה אסון ובקנה הבקר ובחמורים וינחלם בלחם בכל מקניהם לשנה ההיא. So that's it. He bought all their livestock. So now Pharaoh, he's not buying it for himself. He's procuring all the livestock for Pharaoh. So that is that. ופתאום השנה ההיא ויבוא אליו בשנה השנית ויאמרו לו לא נכחד מאדוני כי אם תם הכסף ומקנה הבהמה אל אדוני לא נשאר לפני אדוני בלתי אם גוויותינו ואדמתנו. So that's it. We sold off our livestock. The only thing we have left is our own bodies. And the word here for bodies, gviatenu, implies a dying or a dead body, basically our corpses. Right? Let's see how they translate it here. Body. So here's a good one. So Judges 14:9 we can go to. This is the famous story with Shimshon, the riddle he gave to the Philistines, the Philistines. Let's do a little sidetrack here because this is one of my favorite stories. So Judges 14:9. Let's grab the Hebrew. We'll go back to verse 2. Shimshon's riddle. וישב מימים ולקפתה ויסר לראות את מפלת האריה והנה עדת דבורים בגוויית האריה ודבש. So he returned. He's coming back to the Philistines, and he goes off to see the lion that he killed. Remember, he killed a lion with his own hands. And what does he see? That, literally a congregation of a devorim, a swarm of bees. So now we know how to say a swarm of bees in biblical Hebrew. Adat devorim, right? V'giviat aryeh u'devash. Okay, so here it says in the gvi'ah, and this is the same word we just saw in Genesis, right? So gvi'ah here means the corpse, right? The corpse of the aryeh u'devash. So he sees the swarm of bees in the corpse of the lion, and he sees honey. Why? Yirdehu el kapah wa yalech haloch wa achol. So he takes it into his hands and he eats it, meaning the honey, not the bees, as he's walking. Biblical proof that Samson, who was, well, I guess he was not technically a prophet. I don't think God ever spoke directly to Samson, to Shimshon, but he was pretty close, right? I think they spoke to his father, right? Because his father gave him, his father asked for signs. Well, I guess it's not directly speaking. Anywho, a judge over Israel is eating honey, so there we go. Biblical proof that honey from a bee is kosher. If we can assume, which we can't always assume, that the ancient Israelites, even the judges, were keeping the Torah. But I think we can, and so therefore we see biblical proof that bees' honey is kosher. Okay, quote unquote kosher. And mom, daddy too, so they're keeping kosher. He nigviat aryeh rada hedavosh. Okay, so, and he didn't tell them that this had seeped or flowed from the, or they had taken it from the gvi'ah, from the corpse of the lion. And the point here is, and the reason I went to this verse, is that it uses the word gvi'ah. Gvi'ah, we see explicitly here in the story, means a corpse. It means that the body of the dead lion, right? It's a dead body, right? Well, that's the same word. Close this off. That's the same word here that the Egyptians are using, right? So they're not just saying, it's often translated here, like if we look at the NIV, I'm sure they'll translate it in that, our bodies or something like that, but that doesn't really describe it. Right, so this is verse 18, so Genesis 47:18. Right? There's nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Okay, so that's the English translation. Okay, I would imagine, I'm going to guess, that's enough for Robert Alter for a second. Let's go to Everett Fox. So, I guess around 70. Nope, overshot the landing pad. 60. Genesis 47. So where was this? Genesis 47:18. So he's usually has a better translation. Let's see what he has to say. So I'm going to guess he's not going to translate his body, but maybe something more like along the lines of what I'm thinking. No, he says bodies too. Robert Alter, 47:18. If Robert Alter says bodies, then I'm going to be a little bit shocked. Genesis 47:18. And then or carcasses. There we go. Thank you, Robert Alter. Okay, so I wouldn't translate it as carcasses, right? The way I would actually translate this, if I were doing a translation and commentary on the Torah, which I've already started working on, would be our dying bodies, and that's the implication here. Okay, they're being dramatic. They're being drama queens. Okay. Let us not, disappear. In modern Hebrew, lekached means to be extinct. Let us not go extinct before our master. My master, ki im kam kesef amikneu habehema el adoni lo nishar. So all our money's used up, all of our livestock are used up. Okay, lo nishar lifnei adoni bilti im viatenu admatenu. The only thing that remains for us is our dying, our withering bodies, our withering away bodies, and our land. Right. So they're being dramatic. Right. They're saying, we're dying, help, help. I'm dying. I'm melting. Right? So, just to point that out. It's not a regular, it doesn't say gufenu like our bodies. It says our dying bodies, right? Carcass. Robert Alter translates it as. I don't actually like that translation because carcass already implies that they're dead, right? And gvia implies that they're dying, right? In fact, we're going to see this at the very end of Genesis. Let's find it right now. When Yaakov dies, kind of a sad moment. We're going to see the same word. So 49:33. Let's go to the Hebrew. Verse 33, we're going to get to this, hopefully. ויכל יעקב לצוות את בניו. So Yaakov finished to command or to give his last will and testimony, one could say. Tziva'ah in modern Hebrew is a last will and testament. Et yibana wa yasuf rigalau el hamita, and he gathered his feet onto the bed. Wa yasif el emal. And so he gathered his feet onto the bed, basically like, lay down, and uyigva, and he died, or he withered away, right? Let's see how they translated here. Breathed his last, they translated here. And if we go to, well, this is 33. Go back to the English. No, I don't want to go to the English. I want to go to the parallel. 1 second here. Parallel. 49. 23. Okay, breathed his last is the NIV. So is the NLV, ESV, breathed his last. They copy each other a lot of times. Yielded up the ghost. Oh, I love that one. Thank you, King James Bible. Yielded up the ghost. Gotta love that one. Breathed his last. Died. Holman Christian Standard Bible, American Standard Version, yielded up the ghost. I believe the American Standard Version is a modern implementation of the King James Version, so it's not surprising. Grew weak. That's a good one. Died. Yielded up the ghost. Took his last breath. So I would translate it as either died, I think is the best translation, or withered away, might be a way to translate it. At any rate, the point is that we see here in 33, so he finished, and he withered away, or he died, right? This is the same word, well, not exactly the same word, but from the same root, right? This is the noun form of the root gava, which means to wither away, to die, right? It's the same thing we see here, viathenu, right? In verse 18. So a translation would be our dying bodies, or our withering bodies, or something like that, or our dying bodies, right? So so this translation of body really just takes a kind of a three-dimensional Hebrew word and smashes it down into 2 dimensions. The word body is not really a good translation. And of course, Robert Alter, he's far from perfect, right? And many other Bible scholars that you'll listen to, academic style Bible scholars. And in a second, I'll point out 2 lecture series that I've been listening to lately. Okay, we got some. Okay, I'll get to the comments in a second. But so Robert Alter, one of the great things he does, I think they officially call it a literary translation, is he's very expressive, and he tries to be expressive in his English translation of the Hebrew, right? He tries to find words and phrases that somehow attempt to bring out the essence of the depth of the meaning in the Hebrew. Hence his translation, carcass, which is it's a good translation. The only thing I disagree with it is that carcass, although that may be literally what gvia means, doesn't express the the sentiment here, because they're not dead, they're just dying, right? So our dying bodies, or our withering bodies, might be a good translation here. Anyway, I've lingered too long on this. The point being that viathenu expresses the idea. It's not just, they're being dramatic, right? Please help us, we're dying. Okay, so that's all they have left is their land. Okay, at least they have that. If we live in modern Israel today, we don't even have that, right? In modern Israel, we don't even have our own land, right? The land is owned by the government. So despite all of this pretense to be a democracy, a demokratia, and to be, a modern, Western country in the Middle East, that is a load of baloney in so many ways. which is why, and I don't want to get, sidetracked down the road of politics. I've always said for years that Israel is a military dictatorship, which what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, which presents itself to the world as a Western democracy. It's not a Western democracy. It's essentially a military dictatorship / oligarchy. And one of the proofs is that you cannot own land in Israel. But I think 97% of the land is 3% of the land, which is something called tabu, which is it's not a English word like taboo. It's, I believe, a Turkish word, which means privately owned land. But it's only 3% of the land in all of Israel. Okay, so first of all, this goes against the the democratia that the Israelis love to talk about, right? This lie that Israel is a democracy. Okay, it really harkens back to the communists, the Russian Ashkenazi communists like like a Ben Gurion and his ilk. It harkens back to them. They were communists. They were hardcore communists, and basically Israel was founded as a communist state, not as a Western democracy. It was basically found as a communist state to a large degree. Yes, it had a Knesset, which implied elements of democracy, but it was basically a communist state built in the fabric of Russian / Soviet communism, because a lot of the founding fathers of the modern state of Israel came from the Soviet Union, or at least came from the pale of Jewish settlements in the former Soviet Union, and they were communists. And remember, it was basically the Jews who began communism in Russia, right? Karl Marx was a Jew, as were a bunch of other well-known communists, right? So in Israel today, you cannot own your own land. The only thing you could do is lease it from the government for a long period of time. You could do a 99-year lease, or I don't know all the details, so I don't remember all the details, but that's the idea. Okay, so at least the Egyptians, even though they're dying, they're withering away, at least they still have their land, right? They can sell their land. You can't even sell your land in Israel because you don't own it to begin with, because the corrupt government, the oligarchs and the communists own your land. Okay, enough politics. I said I was sidetracked on politics, but what can I do? All right. Ma in po demokratia, aval yesh nashim b'kirbi. I don't get it. God is one. Yes, it is. So I think it's safe to say we weren't from the New World. All of that prehistory stuff is conjecture. Are you implying that you're a horse, Jonathan? Absolutely. All right, let's go up and grab a couple comments here. Horses are a fact native to the New World. They spread to Eurasia in prehistory. Okay. I'm not going that far back, Lucian Judaism, but okay, fair enough. Gotcha. They spread then on from Siberia to Central Asia and Eastern Europe, and their usage was popular. Okay, fair enough. For example, the Hebrew word for horse is said to be of Indo-European origin from an unknown language, but the etymology is not Semitic. All right, fair enough. Thank you for the information. Great information. And then Jonathan Bailey responds, that's all conjecture. They were already fully developed cavalry cultures, blah, blah, blah. The Vedas were based on horse. Okay, you guys argue it out. I'm out of this one. But thank you, Jonathan, also for that information. And then Shabuel says, God is one. Thank you for that information. Sometimes you have to be reminded of that. Kravi. Aval yesh nashim b'kravi. Okay, got it. Right, exactly. Thank you. Exactly. That proves it's a democracy, that we can send our women to die. Oh, Jonathan's here. Hold on. Jonathan, our women can die proves that we're a democracy. How democratic of us not to protect our women because we sacrifice them on the altar of Western democracy. Are Karaites Sadducees? Oh, that's a complicated question. I'm not going to be able to answer that in a nutshell. I guess the answer is basically yes and no. So there you go. Jonathan Bailey says no. The Karaites have certain things in common with the Sadducees. The Sadducees rejected the oral law of false rabbis of ours, but I won't and they stuck basically to the written law. Therefore, their interpretation of the Torah seemed to be much closer to the text. In that sense, they're like Karaites, because we Karaites also reject the quote-unquote oral law of the rabbis, which is nothing more than a farce. They don't have an oral law. What they have is a way of interpreting the Torah that they developed originally in Babylon, which then spread to Israel, and which they then eventually put down in writing, and they lied to everyone saying it was passed down as an oral law in order to give it more credence. Anyway, even Rabbanicists are not Pharisees. Good point. Excellent, excellent point. That is so true. And exactly what Lucien Janussim says, at the end of the day, no modern groups represent any Second Temple period movement. I agree 100%. So the fact of the matter is that the Karaites share that in common with the Sadducees, that they both rejected the Pharisaic / rabbinical movement. They rejected the quote-unquote oral law, but they're not directed from the Sadducees. So the Sadducees basically ceased to exist. Well, I guess at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, because they were, as Jonathan Bailey points out, they were Levitical priests, right? They were ultimately associated with the Hashmoneans, and going back to the Maccabees, and we know that the Maccabees were from the tribe of Levite, that they were Kohanim, that they were priests, right? So the Sadducees were associated with the Hashmonean dynasty. They were basically priests, and therefore they were very closely linked to the Second Temple, to the temple in their time. The Second Temple, and when it was destroyed by the Romans, with, in my personal opinion, the blessing and the help of the Pharisees. I think the Pharisees, despite all of their crocodile tears and all of their statements, they deliberately wanted the Second Temple destroyed because that's how they were able to rise to power. They were able to rise to power by creating a Judaism which was not linked to the temple. Because when you link, I won't even say Judaism, when you link Torah to the temple, then who's in charge? It's who the Torah says. It's the Kohanim. It's the Levites. But they wanted to usurp power from the rightful leaders of the nation of Israel, meaning the Kohanim, the Levites, the prophets, and one could even say the elders and the judges, right? So they wanted to usurp power, and the best way they could do that would be to make sure the temple was destroyed, because once the temple was destroyed, then there was no more need for Kohanim and Levites, so there was no more work for them, and then they could more easily take over the nation, which is exactly what they wanted. Remember, it was the Pharisees who invited the Romans in to solve their problems between themselves and the Sadducees. Okay, so but the Karaites have no direct connection to the Sadducees in the sense that there's no overlap in time. They may, it would be like saying, I don't know, what would be a good example? I don't know. I can't even think of an example of it. So at any rate, the Sadducees, their party ended, or their movement ended very abruptly in 70. The Second Temple was destroyed. The Karaites are associated, or the Karaite movement basically spread along, ironically, with the Islamic conquests. And the reason, as far as I can understand and interpret, is that along with the Islamic conquests, the rabbinical movement spread, because the Muslims, as they took hold, eventually they reached Babylon, which is where the center of the Pharisaic or the rabbinical movement pretty much was at that time. It was in Babylon and in Israel still at that time. And as the Muslims spread out, as the Muslim conquests spread out and a lot of countries came under the umbrella of the Muslims, including as far out as Spain and Portugal, eventually Morocco. Then so the Talmud spread, and as the Talmud spread, then opposition to the Talmud spread. I was listening to a very interesting lecture yesterday by, in fact, I should find it right now. This is one of the two lecture series which I wanted to post, but I'll do that in a second because I'm getting too far off track. At any rate, so the Karaite movement essentially arose along with the Islamic conquests as a counteracting, or as a counter a balance to Rabbinical Judaism, which was spreading like wildfire along with the Islamic conquests. So Lucian Janusim says Muslims prefer Rabbinicism as their midrashim correspond with their Quranic stories. Very much so. I mean, there was a lot of interaction in the especially the later Middle Ages between the Muslims and the Jews, Neoplatonism and all of this kind of stuff, which spread from Islam eventually into Judaism, and maybe characterized best by the Rambam, who was a Neoplatonist, basically. Bingo, exactly. So basically, the Muslims did not want to control, or did not want to administer the Jews directly, as many conquerors don't, right? So they basically worked with the rabbis, and the rabbis became the administrators of the Jews within the Islamic territories, and so that contributed to the spread of Rabbinical Judaism, which before then had basically, even though it was many years after the Talmud had been written, at that point, we're talking about the 600s CEs, 700 CEs, basically was still restricted to Babylon and the land of Israel. It really, as far as I can see, had not really spread much beyond that. And then as the Islamic conquest spread, so did the Talmud, so did Rabbinical Judaism, and suddenly they're coming in contact with Jews who had never kept this form of Judaism before and were horrified by it. And that really is what was one of the major impetuses of the Karaite movement. It was a reaction to the spread of Rabbinical Judaism. Shamuel Shin, you want to link to what? Yeah. Okay. Yep. It's on there. I can't get the link right now, but if you go to my channel and look for conversion videos, there are two of them. Okay, so that's that. Let's unwind a little bit here. Where were we? So they're selling their bodies and their land. Verse 20. Why? كان يوسف قال أدمات مصرايم يفرعوا كي مخرو مصرايم إيش صديه كي خزاك عليهم الرعاب واتهي أرض لفرعوا. So now, so they sold all their land. That's the first thing to go. And now all the land belongs to Pharaoh. So see how a famine can turn the land of Egypt into the modern state of Israel. See, now the Pharaoh owns all the land, just like in the modern state of Israel. And they transferred all of the people into the cities. So they took them off their land and transferred them into the cities. I could go on for an hour here about how exactly that's what's happening in the United States, right? I don't even have to say that if you look back 100 or 150 years ago, most people were farmers. They had their own plots of land, and the wealth was much more evenly distributed. And the rise of industry, the rise of service economy, of greed, has now basically forced many people off of their land over the past 100, 150 years and into the large cities. So they're no longer landowners. They live in these tiny little apartments in New York City where they pay $5,000 a month, literally, for an apartment in Manhattan, like I think like a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in Manhattan now goes for $5,000 a month. So they have to work these crazy jobs all the time and these crazy hours just to make ends meet and blah 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 blah. So same thing here. It's exactly what's going on here. They were thrown off their own land. They went from being landowners to being basically being city dwellers, serfs and city dwellers, slaves and city dwellers, just like in the modern day United States of America. Okay, and we know that this is explicitly against the Torah. If we go to Leviticus chapter 25, We have there all the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, and we know that Jubilee, Yovel, Jubilee year, we know that one of the main laws of the Jubilee year is that all of the land goes back to its original owners. As Bnei Israel, as the children of Israel, we all have an inheritance in the land, which means we have a plot of land, which not only doesn't belong to the government, it belongs to us, and it can never, ever be taken away from us. And if it's taken away temporarily until the Jubilee year, at which time it reverts back to its original owners. And therefore, if you're going to rent out your land in ancient Israel, you can only rent it out for a maximum of 50 years until the next Jubilee year. And all you're doing is renting out use of the land, right? The land never, ever changes ownership. There's a land inheritance that everyone gets, and that can never, ever be taken away. Contrast that with the so-called free United States of America, whereby, yes, you can purchase land, but if you can't make the payments on your house, on your land, then you will get a tax lien, or you'll get a lien or a tax lien against that land, against the house and the land, and it can be taken away from you. So really, the ownership of land in a country like the United States of America, especially a country like the United States of America, is an illusion. It's basically a rental, because if you can't pay the rent on it, which means the taxes to the government or the usurious interest to the banks, then it will be taken away from you, and really quickly. Okay, so that's that. All right. Vayomer Yosef el Ha'am, hen qaniti etchem hayom wa'et admatchem if'aro hem lochem zera u zera'atem et ha'adama. Okay, I got you on your land, I own you in your land now. And notice how like the two go together, right? These were farmers, right? So they're very connected with their land. So what's going to happen? Wahaya بتبوءات ونتات الحامشيت لفرعون وأربعة حيادات لكم لزرع الشده ولأخلكم لعشر ببطيخم لأخول ولتأخم. So you're going to pay me you're going to pay Pharaoh a fifth, and you're going to keep 4/5. So it's basically a 20% tax to Pharaoh. But remember, some of the stuff that remains in your hand is not going to be for profit. You'll have to use some of that for seed. I'm not going to give you seed, new seed each year. You're going to have to use some of that for seed, right? So what ends up in the farmer's hand is, who knows, maybe another 20% for seed. So maybe 60% of the original ends up in the farmer's hand for them to feed their family, themselves and their family. So that's the deal. Basically 10% tax. I'm sorry, 20% tax on all of their produce. So now they are basically serfs, right? They're giving 20% to the overlord, to Pharaoh, and they're keeping 80% for themselves, which includes the amount that they have to use for the seed next year. Okay. Again, kind of like the United States, where you have to purchase, for the most part, if you're growing, let's say, wheat or corn, then you have to purchase what is this Roundup seed, right? Which you're not even allowed to save the seed, or maybe it doesn't even, maybe it's only, maybe they've genetically engineered it to the point, I think, at this point, where it can only be used once. It will not reseed. So even if you save the seed, it can't be planted. I'm not so sure about that, because I know there have been cases where the seeds have strayed into other fields and started growing, and then Monsanto, which owns Roundup, is coming soon, and blah, blah, blah. You guys all know that story if you're in the United States. So at any rate, so it's the same thing in modern United States, right? Basically, yes, technically you own, if you're a farmer, you own your land, but you're in heavy debt. You're constantly worried about where your next dollar is going to come from. If you can't pay off your taxes, if you can't pay off your debt, then the land is taken away from you, so you don't really own it to begin with. Not the same way that the Torah envisions that we Israelites own our land in Leviticus 25. And on top of that, you have to purchase seed each year from this company, right, from this Monsanto. And so you can't even really keep your own seed to reseed. So actually the conditions that Yosef provided here, even though he took all the land away and put them into the cities and then made them go work the land, I guess, surrounding the cities, is the implication. Joseph's conditions were much more fair than the so-called free United States of America. I mean, I don't even get me started. I don't live in the United States of America. I've not lived in the United States of America for 3 years. And a significant part of my life, I've not lived in the United States of America, but I've been back there now for 3 years. I never want to see that sick, deranged Sodom and Gomorrah again as long as I live. I may have to go back there at some point, at least for a while. But it's Sodom and Gomorrah in so many different ways. But one of the ways that's constantly not brought to attention. Yes, they talk a lot about the drag queen story hours and all this kind of sodomy and in a literal kind of sense. And but what they forget is all the economic Sodom and Gomorrah activities that go on there, the stealing and the stealing from the average person of their very sustenance. So, all right, I'm not going to go into that anymore. Okay, so the only people who were exempt from that are the Kohanim. Kohanim were the priests to the gods of, we're talking about, of course, to the gods of Egypt. Okay, so they were exempt from being belonging slaves to Pharaoh. Isn't that kind of ironic that if we contrast it with Torah, it's the Kohanim and the Levites that are brought into service to God, right? They basically become servants or slaves to God. Well, it's not that much of a contrast. It's actually a similarity in the sense that, yes, they're not there. They answer directly to God and they get their sustenance from the tithes. Okay. Verse 20 said, Vayechi Israel be'eretz Mitzrayim. Be'eretz Goshen. What? Yeah. Zu. What? So they became fruitful and multiplied, right? Become fruitful and multiply. So this is an example of the same language that's used in Genesis 1, right? The blessing that's given to, without looking. Is anyone? Oh, hello, Phil. Hey, nice to see you, buddy. Oh, wow, long time no see. So without looking back at Genesis 1, the blessing, be fruitful and multiply, is given to two groups. One is humans, okay, given to Adam and Eve, fruitful and multiply, or specifically to Adam, right? Can anyone guess what the other one is? It's one other place in Genesis 1 where the blessing, be fruitful and multiply, is given. Without looking. Yeah, Phil, great. We got to catch up sometime. You should text me your phone number. I would love to call and catch up. So, all right. So without looking, besides human beings, would anyone like to guess what other group of creatures is given the blessing, be fruitful and multiply? There's only one other group, to the best of my recollection. It's a hard one. Okay, going once, twice. I'll type it in. It's the fish. Okay, we can sidetrack just for a second. So Genesis 1. Let's go to the English. We can go quickly. Okay. Lights, birds, sea. So here it is. Be fruitful and increase in number. That's the same as fruitful and multiply. Fill the water in the seas and let the birds increase in the earth. So it's the fish, okay, and the birds. But very interesting. So the land creatures don't get explicitly the blessing of be fruitful and multiply, right? So when Adam or mankind was created, then they get the be fruitful and multiply blessing. Okay, so it's the fish and the birds, fruitful and multiply, and human beings. Those are the two entities that explicitly get the blessing in Genesis 1 to be fruitful and multiply. And we have exactly the same words here. This is why they were fruitful and they multiplied. Ma'od, right? So is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Well, it's good for Israel, but this is precisely foreshadowing to the book of Exodus because this is going to be the threat that the later Pharaoh, right, in the time of Moses, a couple of generations down the line, sees. He was afraid of the fact that Israel had grown so big, that they became great in number. And this is one of the things, or this is the main motivation that are to take action against the Israelites, right? Okay, so verse 28, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, Shiva Esrei Shona, Vayehi Yemei Yaakov Chayav, Shiva Arba'im Ana, and outline of Egypt for 7 years. 147 years, right? So we saw earlier, he came down to the land of Egypt, the age of 147. Lived in 7 years. 17 Joseph was 17 so a couple of years ago, 17 years old when he was sold down to Egypt, right? So that means that that Yaakov spent precisely 34 years of his life with his son Yosef. He spent the first 17 years of Yosef's life with him, then Yosef was taken away from him, and he spent the last 17 years of his own life, and that's when he came down to Egypt and was with Yosef. So we can actually do a little bit of a calculation here, can't we? We could figure out, we know that Yosef, we spoke about this in last Parashah, we know that Yosef was came to Egypt, and he was 17 years old, it says explicitly. Then it says explicitly when he was taken out to Pharaoh, he was taken out of the prison and handed over to Pharaoh, or brought to Pharaoh to interpret Pharaoh's dream, it says he was 30 years old. So he was 13 years in the hole. And then he predicts the 7 years of famine. Okay? So that's another 7 years. That ostensibly starts right after that. So that's now 13 plus 7, so that's 20 years since it's been taken away from his father Yaakov. Then it says, we saw this in last week's Parsha, that the brothers came down in the 2nd year of the famine, right? So there were 7 good years. So Joseph was in the hole for 13 years. Maybe we should do a little spreadsheet. Let's do it. Call this, actually, do it this way. This is actually fascinating stuff. I love doing this kind of stuff because it taps into my my love for math. So let's just grab all of this. New one plus tab. No, tab. Plus. Okay, let's grab it for formatting. Yosef. Get rid of all this. Again, I'm just leaving the formatting. And so I'll just leave these here for now, but we could say that, okay, so Yosef was 17 years old. Let's put the number here, age that Yosef was sold to Egypt. Let me make this a little bit larger. There we go. Okay, so this is number, description. Get rid of the rest of these for now. We can expand this out. Okay, so Yosef was 17 years old when he was sold to Egypt. And if we really want to do this the right way, we go back and find the verses where it actually says this. Okay, it says explicitly that he was 30 years old when he was taken out of the hole. Yosef was, oops. Joseph was taken out of the prison. Joseph was taken out of the dungeon and brought before. Okay. Then he predicts 7 good years followed by 7 bad years. Okay. So 7 years later, so we could say 7 years of plenty. And then there were 7 bad years, but it says that the brothers came down in the 2nd year of the famine. Okay, year of the 7-year famine in which the brothers came down. Okay, so let's do it this way. Okay, let's figure it out this way. We're going to say Joseph's age, and we're going to say Yaakov's age, and we're going to work this. We're going to fill in all the missing pieces, and we're going to figure out something very interesting here. Yaakov's age, yeah. Yaakov's age. So, right. Okay, good. So that means Joseph was 17. Okay. So, so year of the 7-year famine in which the brothers came down. Okay, so they came down in the 2nd year of the famine, and we could assume, we don't know exactly the time until they went back up and brought Yaakov down and he settled in Goshen, but I'm going to call it, like 0 time. It was a short amount of time, we could say, right? If we're off by a year or so, then there's nothing we can do about it. Like, say it took a year for the brothers to go back and bring the whole family down. I don't know. It doesn't say anything about that, so we can't assume, right? So we're just going to do as best as we can. So we know the number of years that Yaakov was in Egypt before he died. And let's add here verse. Say here, well, I'm not going to fill it in now. So 1 column left. Verse. Okay. I can always go back and fill it later, but I'm going to dig it up right now. Okay. So number of years that Yaakov was in Egypt before he died, we know that that's 17. It says so right here. Here we can fill in our verse. So this is going to be Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shva esrei shana. Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. So that's Genesis 47:28. Genesis 47:28. Okay. So we know that Yaakov, when he came down, was 130 years old. Yaakov's age when he came down to Egypt. And that's explicit in verse, where was it? Now we've got to find it. Okay, a second. Yaakov, Yomer Pharaoh, Yaakov, Kamash, here he goes. So in verse 8, 47:8, Pharaoh asked Yaakov how old he is. And verse 9, Yomer Yaakov el Pharaoh, Yevish name, blah, blah, blah. I should say blah, 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 but you get the idea. 130 years old. Okay? Shloshim ma'at shana. So that's Genesis 47:9. Genesis 47:9. Yaakov tells Pharaoh that he's 130 years old. We know that Yaakov dies at the age of 147. Yaakov's age when he dies, and that's explicit in, we saw that in, where was it? It was Genesis 49. Let's grab the English just a little bit more quickly. So Genesis 49. Oops. 8, 9. So Yaakov was 47 years old. Wait, where was it? It's 50. Okay, I can't find it right now. But Yaakov is 147 years old when he dies. Okay. Okay, so let's fill in some of the numbers here. Okay, so we know that Yaakov's age here is 147. A little bit. Oops. Let's back a little bit. Okay, so we know that Yaakov's age is 147 when he dies. So we know that Yosef's age is 30 here, right, when he's taken out of the dungeon. Then, let's just say end of the years of plenty, end of the years of plenty. We know it lasted 7 years, so that means Yosef was 37 here. Then, in the second year, the second year of the 7-year famine, which came after the end of the 7 years of plenty. So 2 more years is when the brothers came down. So that means Yosef is 39. And then Yaakov immediately comes down, we're going to assume, more or less, maybe took a month or two. Okay, so we know that Yosef here, when Yaakov comes down, Yosef is 39. Right? Yaakov's age when he came down to Egypt. So Yaakov's 39. Yaakov's age when he dies, so that's 17 years later. Okay? So that's going to be 39 plus 17 is 56. Okay? 39 plus 20 is 59, minus 3 is 56. So that's Yaakov's age. I'm sorry, Yaakov's age when he dies is 147. Yosef's age is 56. Now we can work it backwards, okay? So if we know that this is now 17 years earlier, we know that Yaakov's age when he came down to Egypt is 130. Right? That's the same as the number here. Over here, 130. 130. When the famine started, Yaakov was 128. When Yosef was taken out of the dungeon, that was 7 years earlier. So it's 128 minus 7 is 121. And then if we subtract another 13 years, so 121 minus 13 is 111, is 108. So Yaakov was 108 years old when Yosef was taken away, right? And we can even add one more, which is Yosef is born. So if he was 17 years old, so let's say 0, Yosef's age was 0. 108 minus 17 is going to be 91. So that means that Yaakov was 91 years old when Yosef was born. Right? There we go. Screenshot it if you'd like. Okay. So I think we've done all the math there. Okay. So let's see. Phil says 30. Okay. So Joseph is sold to the Ishmaelites. Genesis 37, 27. But I really want the verse where it says explicitly that he's 17 years old because we're dealing with the numbers. At any rate, there we go. So Yosef is born when Yaakov is 91 years old, and Yaakov dies when he's 147 years old, and when Yaakov is 56 years. I'm sorry, when Yosef is 56 years old. All right, good, interesting stuff. So, all right, Lucian Judaism says Ephraim and Menashe were born to an Egyptian mother. It seems that they were not even Jewish according to rabbinicist heresy. Don't tell the rabbis. Maybe they converted. Or maybe you know what the rabbis will say. Of course, we know what the rabbis will say. The rabbis will say that the mother converted, right? The Egyptian mother, Osnat was her name. That's explicit. We'll get to that in a bit. Converted, right? Okay, so that's that. So going back to Genesis 47. Right. Okay, so Yaakov is 147 years old, and this is actually where this week's parsha starts. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, and then what's the name of the parsha? Vayechi, and there it is. Yeah, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shiva esrei shana. So Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. Vayehi yimei Yaakov shnei hayav sheva shanim u'arba'im u'ma'at shana, and Yaakov was 147 years old. Okay, that's what we're looking for. Genesis 47:28. So that's explicit here. Genesis 47:28. Okay. All right. All right. So now we're actually beginning this week's parsha. All right. Let's get a little Robert Alter on that one, just for the heck of it. Variation. Okay, 28. Oops. 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 Let's try that again. So Genesis 47. 28. And I'm not going to click here. I'm just going to copy this page number so that we can have the text and the commentary side by side. There we go. 28. Okay. And Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the symmetry with Yosef 17 years until he was sold into Egypt was aptly observed in the Middle Ages by David Himchi. Just as Joseph was in the lap of Jacob 17 years, Jacob was in the lap of Yosef 17 years. Okay, fair enough. Alrighty. So, verse 29. Why yikru yemei Yisrael lamut? Why yikra bivnu liyosef? Why yomer lo im nan masati hayd be'anecha sibna yotcha tahat يرخي وعسيت أي معدي حسد وإمات أدنى بريني بمصرايم. So Yaakov, Israel, paraphrasing here, Israel knew that his days were coming close, the days of his death were coming close, and he called to his son Yosef, and he said, if I've found favor in your eyes, place your hand under my thigh, which we've gone into before, maybe a euphemism for placing it on the private parts. Many interpreters say that. Wasita imadi hased wa emet, because if you're gonna swear on that, man, you're gonna keep you're gonna keep the swear, right? Wasita imadi hased wa emet, and do for me a kindness and truth. So what is Yaakov's? The one thing he wants, he does not want to be buried in Egypt. He wants to be buried back up in the cave of Machpelah, which we saw that Abraham purchased from Ephron the Hittite when Sarah died. Right. Verse 31. Wishahavti im avotai unisatani mimisraim ukvertani bikvurotam wayomer anochi asegid kidevorecha. I want to sleep with my fathers, right? So I've spoken about this phrase extensively. So here he's speaking about it. Well, it's hard to tell. Does he mean literally? He wants his body, because lishkav, shachafti, this first word here means to lie down, but it can also mean to sleep. Okay, so for instance, the word lishkav means to sleep with a woman, to have sexual relations with a woman, right? To lie down with. So is it talking about his dead physical body lying down, or is this a euphemism, or let's say a metaphor, for his soul being connected to the souls of his ancestors? Well, it's an interesting question. Here it seems definitely more to be relating to the physical, right? Because talking about bringing his physical body back up to the land of Canaan and burying it there, lying it down there. But there's a certain spiritual reason that when we die, I think we want to be buried next to those we love, right? We don't want to be like, maybe it's just anthropomorphizing our dead bodies or something like that. But there's a reason that people like to be buried next to their dead relatives. Somehow or another, the burying of the physical body next to your close relatives, in some way, at least from our perception here on earth, seems in a way to link us more eternally with them. So this phrase, Shkavi Ma'avotai, is used many times throughout the Torah, not throughout the rest of the Tanakh, the Nach, where it says Yashanta im Avotai. Here it usually says V'shachachti im. It does say it also. At any rate, so the point is that he might be referring also to kind of a spiritual rejoining with his ancestors, and not just the physical laying down of his body next to those of his dead relatives. Because if it were just that, why would he care where his body were laid down, right? He's already dead. What does it matter if his dead body is laid down next to Sarah's dead body, or his mother Rivka's dead body, and Leah was buried there, but Rachel was not, right? In the cave of Machpelah, Rachel was buried in Kever Rachel on the road to Ephrat, it says explicitly, right? So at any rate, the point I'm trying to make is that there seems to be some kind of spiritual reason behind Yaakov wanted to be brought out of Egypt and buried with his dead relatives in the cave of Machpelah, which implies that this phrase "Shachachti Avotai," that I want to lie down with my fathers, implies more of a spiritual rejoining of his soul to those of his fathers, and implies, although not explicitly but implicitly, implies the Torah's belief in the existence of an afterlife. Okay. Unisatani, so take me out of here, carry me up, right? Going down to Egypt is always use the word la redet is used to go down. And here, nasatani, carry me up out of, right? Carry me out of Egypt, but the implication is lift me up out of Egypt. So going from Egypt back up to the land of Canaan is always construed as aliyah, is la'alot, to go up, right? That's why in modern Hebrew, if you become a citizen of the land of or the state of Israel, or move to Israel, you're making aliyah, you're going up. Okay, and if you leave the state of Israel to live somewhere else, then you're making yirida, you're going down, right? But it could just be, again, a physical description of the fact that the land of Canaan is hill country, and the land of Egypt is just a flat plain. So that might be the reason, rather than some kind of philosophical / spiritual implication of spiritually going up. Okay, at any rate, so Yaakov makes Yosef swear with a solemn oath by putting his hand under his thigh, that he's not going to let his body remain in Egypt, that he's going to bring him up to the place where his ancestors are buried. Okay? And Yosef says, I will do according to your words. I will do as you say. So Yaakov makes Yosef swear. And Yosef swears. Okay? So we see also that Yosef at the end of Genesis also does not want to, he wants the same thing, right? He tells, if we could just find it for a second. Let me just go to the English to make it go a bit quicker. So Yosef does pretty much the same thing. Okay, Yosef says to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So it's the same thing. Yosef is making his brothers swear. So we're not really talking about his brothers, his relatives, right? It's translated as brothers. That says the Israelites. So, right. It doesn't say brothers. Right? So, so Yosef is making the Israelites take the same oath that Yaakov here is making Yosef take. Now we know that Yosef brought Yaakov's body, right? We're going to get to that at the end of Genesis in chapter 50. The Yaakov's body was embalmed, and then it was brought up to the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, in Kiryat Arba, and there Yaakov was buried, right? But we also know that Joseph's bones were brought out of the land of Egypt by Moses. It says so explicitly, if we can find it. Oops, where is it? Let's do it this way. So we've got to go to Exodus, and that's going to be, let's see if my memory serves me correctly. So Exodus 12 is it's probably going to be Exodus 13, I guess, something like that. Here it is, Exodus 13:19. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place, right? So almost word for word, right? Joseph said to his brothers, God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. Here it says, God will surely come to my aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place, right? So almost word for word, the oath that is mentioned in Genesis 50:25 is repeated here in Exodus 13:19. So that's the fulfillment of this oath that was taken in Genesis 47, where Joseph swears to Jacob that he's going to take Jacob's bones back up to Egypt. So that is then fulfilled in Genesis chapter 50, which we'll get to if we finish all of this week's Parsha. I'll just put it in the English again. So in Genesis chapter 50, so here we go, right? So this is where Joseph went up to bury his father, right? So that's fulfilled in Genesis chapter 50, right? This oath that's being made in Genesis chapter 47, okay? So the Israelites do not want their bones left in Egypt. That's for darn sure. All right, so unravel this. And we go into chapter 48. Okay. ויהי אחרי הדברים האלה, ויאמר ליוסף, הנה אביך חולה, ויקח את שני בניו עמו, את מנשה ואת Ephraim. So afterwards, later on, it was told to Joseph that his father was sick. So Joseph and Yaakov were not living in the same place, right? Joseph was ostensibly in the capital of Egypt. I'm not sure exactly what it was. Memphis, perhaps? Let's go with Memphis if and when we look it up, right? And we know that Yaakov and the rest of the family was in Goshen, right? So then when Yosef finds out that his father is dying, so they, even though Yaakov was 17 years in Egypt, it's not like they were living right next to each other, right? Who knows how many times Yosef and Yaakov saw each other in those 17 years. But it was enough for Yaakov to know that his son Yosef was alive and that he was safe and that he made quite a success out of himself. I mean, Jewish mothers eat your heart out. Talk about a lawyer, doctor. This guy was, was even more than that, right? Which reminds me of a joke, which you probably all heard because it's an old Jewish joke that I heard many years ago and I've heard many times repeated since, but I'll say it anyway. So it's the idea of, as when I speak to people about my upbringing, it was kind of expected without ever being said in my family, typical Ashkenazi Jewish family, that I was to get, A's in high school. I was to go on to a top-notch college. And then I was to be either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. So I became, I guess in a certain sense, I became an engineer. I did my degree in undergrad. My undergraduate degree was in computer science, so that's kind of a computer engineer. But at any rate, I never stuck to that very much. I have worked in it here and there over the years, but I never really stuck to that. But the point is, here's the joke, right? So that's what's expected from in the United States of America, at the very least, from Jewish kids, Ashkenazi Jewish kids. You grow up, you become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, maybe a banker as well. Okay, something along those lines, or work in finance on Wall Street or something like that. That's it. That's the expectations. If you deviate from that, then you have failed your parents. So the joke goes that there's a Jewish boy growing up, and his mother says to him one day, he's like, say 6 years old, and he says, so son, what do you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to be a doctor? He says, no, I don't want to be a doctor. No. He says, so then what? You want to be a lawyer? He says, no way, I don't want to be a lawyer. He says, so you want to be an engineer? He says, no, I don't want to be an engineer. So he says, then what do you want to be? He says, when I grow up, I want to be a rabbi. A rabbi? What kind of profession is that for a nice Jewish boy? Hope you get it. All right. So, okay, we said that. So Yosef takes his sons Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to him in Egypt, and goes up to his father Yaakov. ויגד ליעקב ויאמר הנה בנך יוסף בא אליך ויחזק ישראל וישב על המיטה. So Yaakov is told that Yosef is coming to him, and that gave him strength. It literally says ויחזק ישראל. He found strength, or he became strong, and he sat up on the bed. We saw earlier that he was on his bed already here, right? So this is already, we don't know how much earlier, but Yaakov was already spending a lot of time in bed, shall we say, or else it wouldn't have mentioned this, right? Because he's not going to come to him in the middle of the night when he's sleeping, right? But it said in verse 31, when Yaakov made Yosef swear to take his bones up to take his body up to the land of Canaan, that says that Israel, Yaakov, prostrated himself on the edge of the bed, on the head of the bed, right? So he was in bed when this all happened, right? So he's already, I guess, kind of bedridden at this point. And here we have him again in bed, right? So now he becomes strong and he's able to sit up in his bed, right? So he's not in good shape. He's basically bedridden at this point. Okay. Verse 3. ויאמר יעקב אל יוסף אל שדי נראה אלי בלוז בארץ כנען ויברך אותי. So Yaakov is now recalling his earlier days. He's recalling the days of when he was fleeing Esav. Okay, this is when he had the dream. He's referring to the incident when he had the dream when he was fleeing the land of Canaan, going out to Haran, going out to Padan Aram to be with Uncle Levi, Uncle Lavan, right? Because we know there. How do we know? Because it says that Bet El, which is where he had the dream, Jacob's ladder dream, says was formerly called Luz, right? So he's referring to that incident that's back in. That's going to be Genesis. Let's see here. Probably Genesis. Around Genesis 30 or something like that. No, probably before. Let's give it a shot on Genesis 30. Whoa, this is taking so long. Let's try again. I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. Is it that website? Okay, let's wait. Huh. Let's give it a second until the internet restores itself. And actually, I've got to go plug in. So maybe what I'll do is I will just mute myself.
נזרים עם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ. אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל. השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה. השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ. אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל. השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה. השם ישמורך מכל רע.
All right, we're back. So, where were we? Radio. Yeah, so we were talking about, let's turn music off. So we were talking about the fact that now Yaakov, so now Yosef has come with Ephraim and Manasseh down to Yaakov. Should I say up to Yaakov in Goshen? And now Yaakov starts telling about his the incident he had with the Jacob's ladder. So that's going to be around again Genesis. Let's see here. Genesis 20 maybe. No, bigger than that. Genesis 25. No. 30. No. 27. Okay, here we go. Right, so Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. So here in Genesis 28, Jacob has the Jacob's ladder dream. And it says here, right, early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bet-El. So the city used to be called Luz, right? Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, talking about going out to Haran, to Padan Aram, to Aram Naharaim, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's household, then Yahweh will be my God, and the stone that I've set up as a pillar will be God's house, and all that you give me, I will give you a tenth, right? So God, how did God appear to him? This dream, the Jacob's ladder dream, right? So that was a defining moment in Yaakov's life. He was on his way out. God appeared to them and basically made it, and basically he and God made a covenant. He made a covenant with God. He made a vow to God, right? Saying that if you take care of me, then I'll be yours, your God, and I'll tithe to you. Okay, so this was the defining moment in Jacob's life. This was on his way out of the land of Canaan, just as the defining moment on his way back in the land of Canaan at Peniel was his wrestling with the angel, right? So his coming out of the land of Israel and coming back into the land of Israel is defined by these two events. Going out, the Jacob's ladder dream; coming back in, the wrestling with the angel incident. Okay, so that's what he's referring to here. So verse 3, Vayomer Yaakov el Yosef el Shaddai nira elai baluz. So El Shaddai, God, appeared to me, usually they translate as Almighty God, appeared to me at Luz, right? We saw in Genesis 28 that Bethel was formerly called Luz, right? So that's what he's talking about. He's referring now to the Jacob's ladder dream when he says that God appeared to me. That's specifically what he's talking to. Be'eretz Kina'an vayavarech oti, and he blessed me. V'yomer elai hinene nifarcha vahirbiticha ונתתיך לקהל עמים ונתתי את ארץ הזאת לזרעך אחריך אחוזת עולם. Okay, let's see something here. So that was Genesis 28, we said. Now one more thing. Now when Yahweh's back into the, it's going to be around or so. One second. That's the wrestling with God. 3:34. So after this, so after Yaakov was in Shem and he had this whole incident with Dinah, this is 35. I'm sorry, 35. So Jacob read the bell. Let's just move this over to the English, just again, because we're not focusing on the words here, we're just focusing on the narrative. So it'll make it go a bit quicker. One second here. Right, okay. So actually, and this is why I wanted to bring this up. So we have right? So, okay, let's bring up here Genesis 28. Okay, so Genesis 28 is the Jacob's ladder dream. Here we go. Okay. Stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. That's the Jacob's ladder dream. That's in Genesis 28. On the way back, that's when he's leaving the land of Canaan, of Israel. And then on the way back in, after the whole Shem incident with Dinah, then Jacob returns to Bethel. Again, that's the same place where he had the Jacob's ladder dream. And let's just read this in the English. Jacob and all the people with him came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. After Jacob returned from Padan Aram, God appeared to him again and blessed him. God said, "Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel." So he named him Israel. And God said to him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply, or be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will be among your descendants." So let's just find this here. So actually, I take it back. So this, when Jacob is saying that that God appeared to him at Luz, he's not referring to Genesis. It seems he's not referring to Genesis 28. Okay, when he's leaving the land of Israel, he's referring to Genesis 35 when he comes back into the land of Israel. Okay, when God appears to him after he'd already wrestled with the angel and said his name is Israel, but now this is reiterated by God, shall we say, directly. Okay, so what does God say? I am God Almighty. That's El Shaddai. Here, El Shaddai appeared to me. Okay, God Almighty appeared to me in Luz, in Bethel. So this is talking about, this is referring, so when Yaakov says this in Genesis 48, he's actually referring, it seems, to Genesis 35, when he went back to Bethel on his way into the land of Canaan, not when he had the Jacob's ladder dream on the way out of land of Canaan. How do we know? Yomer Elai hineni mifracha mafracha v'rebiticha v'natitach elecha. I'll just read it in modern Hebrew accent. So I want to focus on the thoughts here. So I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will turn you into, I'll make you into a kahal amim, into a community of nations, and I will give this land to your seed after you as an eternal inheritance. Okay? So we see here that when Yaakov is coming back in and he stops at Bethel, what is God Almighty? El Shaddai. If we look this in the Hebrew, it would say El Shaddai, the same appellation for God that we see in Genesis 47. It says to be fruitful and multiply. Okay? A nation and a community of nations. That's basically what it says here in 47. Okay? Will make you fruitful, multiply. I will turn you into a community of nations. Right? So it's referring to this. The land I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and I'll give this land to your descendants after you. Okay? And that's what it says here. Okay? Natati ta'aretz hazot, I've given, or I will give this land to your seed after you as an eternal inheritance. So clearly, when Yaakov is now saying this to Joseph, who has come with Ephraim and Manasseh, when he says God appeared to me at Luz, it's not referring, my mistake, I said before, it was referring to Genesis 28, the stairway to heaven, or the Jacob's ladder dream on Yaakov's way out of Canaan. But really, no, it's referring to Genesis 35, after Yaakov has wrestled with the angel, after he'd then gone to Shechem, and Dinah had been raped in Shechem. Then he fled from Shechem, and he came to Luz, he came to Bethel, and then once again, God appeared to him at that same place. That was the place he had originally had the Jacob's ladder dream, so it's the same place. But now, God appears to him again and says, I will make you fruitful, I will multiply you, I will turn you into a community of nations, and I will give you this land that I had sworn to your forefathers, Abraham and Isaac. So that is what Yaakov is referring to here in Genesis 48:4. Okay? And let's see if Robert Alter has anything to say about that. So that's 48:4. Just to get a little bit of variety. What do you want, Paul? What? Where? You can have a total of 2. Yeah. Okay. So if you want in the bathroom, then put it in the bathroom, but turn it off in the bed. Okay. Okay. I've got to do this now. Okay. All right. Verse 3. So that's page 510. Verse 3. Okay. Luz. So this is what Robert Alter says. This is the older name for Bethel, where Jacob was vouchsafed his dream vision of divine messengers ascending and descending the ramp to heaven. Okay, so Robert Alter does pick up on the fact that that's referring to, but he doesn't pick up on the fact that it's not referring to Genesis 28, but rather Genesis 35 when it mentions Luz. But okay, doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't know it, he just didn't comment on it. Okay, and we'll get to this in a second. So I can close these out now. ואתה שני בוניך נולדים לך בארץ מצרים עד בואי אליך מצרימה לי הם אפרים ומנשה כי ראובן ושמעון יהיו לי. And now your 2 sons that were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, lihem, they're mine. Okay. Ephraim and Manasseh, those are Joseph's 2 sons. Reuven and Shimon are like Ruvain and Shimon, shall be to me like Ruvain and Shimon. What the heck is he saying here? What does that mean? Does anybody want to say? What is he talking about? What does it mean that his grandsons, Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, will be like Ruvain and Shimon? What does that mean? Does he mean they're gonna come live with him? Does it mean he's gonna call them son now? What exactly does it mean? Anybody want to say? Or anybody have any ideas? Nobody? All right. Well, then I'll say what I believe it means, or what I think is clear it means. All right. This is talking about inheritance. Okay. In other words, Joseph is now being split into two, and we'll talk about the significance of that in a second. Okay. So we know there are 12 sons, right? Reuben, Shimon, etc. Okay. Joseph is one of those sons. That forms Yaakov's 12 sons, all of whom are alive, right? But now what Yaakov is saying is that the next generation, Ephraim and Manasseh, are basically going to move up on the inheritance ladder to be on the same level as the rest of the 11 sons. So Joseph is basically being split into two. That means Ephraim and Manasseh will be their own tribes. We know that later on in the book of Exodus, there is no tribe of Joseph. There's only tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, right? We know that Ephraim was basically came to represent the northern kingdom, right? A lot of times the northern kingdom is referred to as Ephraim. And the southern kingdom is referred to as Judah, even though it also included basically Benjamin as well, okay? So Ephraim and Manasseh become their own tribes. So the grandsons, the Joseph's sons, are moved up a level on the inheritance tree, okay? They become their own individual tribes, and that also means that they get a double portion of the inheritance, okay? In the land. They get a double portion of inheritance in the land, right? And they ostensibly, although it doesn't mention explicitly, get a double portion of inheritance in Yaakov's possessions when he dies. But more importantly, just in the representation of Yaakov's sons, Joseph is broken up into two. So Joseph, through his sons, is getting a double inheritance. Okay. Now, who does double inheritance go to? We know that in the Torah, the double inheritance goes to the firstborn. So basically, what Yaakov is saying when he says this to Joseph is he's saying to Joseph, you are essentially taking the status of the firstborn. Okay. And we're going to see this later on in other ways, right in this parsha. Okay, but this is basically what Yaakov is saying. Yaakov is saying you are, for all intents and purposes, you are the firstborn. Okay, we know. Let's talk about who really is the firstborn of Yaakov. Firstborn of Yaakov is Reuven. We're going to see in the blessings when we get up to it in the next chapter that Reuven is basically knocked off his throne as the firstborn, right? He says, you were Paziz Kamaim, you were as unreliable or as wishy-washy as water, right? And you went up to my couch, you had relations with my concubine, with Bilhah, right? So his firstborn, his status as firstborn is taken away. He doesn't get the double inheritance, and he doesn't get the status as firstborn, right? And the next two are Shimon and Levi, right? They're knocked off the perch as well because Kle Hamas Macharotehem, because the vessels of violence are their wares, right? So they're considered also a little bit too unreliable to be the firstborn, okay? And who comes next after that? Judah. So Judah assumes, I would say, the role of secondary firstborn, and that's why Judah has such an important role later on in Israel, right? King David comes from Judah, and Judah ultimately becomes, represents the southern kingdom, okay? Whereas the northern kingdom is represented by Ephraim, right? Ephraim was the second born. Well, we'll get to that in a second. But Ephraim was born after Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim was born after Manasseh, but Ephraim takes the role of that switches. We're going to see that explicitly in a second. But the point is that Joseph now becomes essentially the firstborn of Yaakov, or he takes the status of firstborn, and that's represented by the fact that he's split into two. Because the firstborn gets the double portion of inheritance. That's explicit in the Torah. We see it codified into the laws of the Torah, but we can understand that this was probably already the tradition, right? Because we're talking here about before the Torah was given. So Torah, first firstborn double portion. Let's find out what that is. Let's say okay. Let's see if I can find it. 1 second. I can't find it right now. Let's see here. Deuteronomy 21:17. So let's take a look at that. So again, we'll stick with the English for a second. So Deuteronomy 21:17. We'll start here. I'll just read in the English for now. If a man has two wives and he loves one but not the other, and both bear him sons, but the firstborn of the son of is the wife does not love, when he wills his property to his son, must not give the rights of the firstborn to the son of the wife he loves in preference to his actual firstborn, the son of the wife he does not love. Yaakov is violating this, by the way, but we'll talk about it in a second. He must acknowledge the son of his unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double share of all he has. That son is the first sign of his father's strength. The right of the firstborn belongs to him. Okay? So we see here that the firstborn gets a double portion, a double share of all that he has. And that's essentially what's being done here with Ephraim and Manasseh, with the sons of Yosef. Okay? They're being broken into two tribes. They're being brought up the family tree to the one level up, right? So instead of Yosef, that's being broken up to Ephraim and Manasseh, and they're, for all intents and purposes, on the same level as the rest of the 11 brothers, as the 11 tribes, what will become the 11 tribes. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, Reuven was the firstborn, but Reuven was the firstborn of the unloved wife. So what is Yaakov doing? He's basically violating this law, which is later codified into the Torah, right? The Torah later on says here in Deuteronomy 21 that if you have a wife that you love and a wife you don't love, if the firstborn is born to the wife that you don't love, that firstborn still gets a double portion. That's exactly what Yaakov is violating here. He's not violating the Torah because the Torah has not yet been given. But it's another example of laws that are codified into the Torah as a result of correcting problems, or correcting, shall we say, things that cause problems to the patriarchs, right? What's another example of that? We know that it's also codified into the law later on in the Torah. We can find the verse in a second, that a man is not to marry a woman and her sister, right? What did Yaakov do? Yaakov married a woman and her sister. He didn't want to, but that was forced upon him. He married Leah and Rachel, Leah and Rachel, right? And that's later codified into the Torah as something that is not to be done, okay? What Yaakov is doing here is also later codified here in Deuteronomy 21 into what is not, okay? So what does Yaakov do? Yaakov, in his eyes, Joseph is really his firstborn, right? Joseph is his beloved son. That's explicit, right? So that in earlier chapters of Genesis, right, that Joseph was the one that was most favored or most beloved by his father Yaakov, okay? And in a certain sense, Joseph is his firstborn because he's the firstborn to his true wife. Who is Yaakov's true wife? Was Rachel. That was the beloved wife, right? Rachel was the unloved wife, right? It says so explicitly, right? So Yaakov really wants to give this double inheritance to the son that he considers his favorite and the firstborn of his beloved wife Rachel, and that's exactly what he does. That's why he makes Ephraim and Manasseh. He splits Joseph into two, making it a double portion, and then brings Ephraim and Manasseh up one level so they're on the same level as the rest of the 11 brothers. Okay, and how does he do it? Also, he knocks who is supposed to be the firstborn to get the double portion. It's supposed to be Reuven. Reuven is the firstborn of Yaakov, right? Reshit kochi ve'oni. We'll say that explicitly. The beginning of my strength and of my prowess, or something like that. Okay, but Reuven is knocked off the perch. Okay, an excuse. I don't know if it's an excuse, but the reason given is that he was unreliable and slept with Yaakov's concubine. So Yaakov is arranging things so that his true, in his eyes, his first true-born, the firstborn of his beloved wife Rachel, can get the double inheritance. And this is essentially what he's doing here by splitting Joseph up into Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay? Make sense? I wonder if Robert Alter picks up on that. I'm sure he does. Verse 5. Now your two sons. So here's what Robert Alter says on that verse. Oops. So these words are equally fraught with thematic and legal implications. Jacob explicitly equates Joseph's two sons with his own firstborn and secondborn, intimating that the former are to have as good an inheritance or better as the latter, and thus once more invokes the great Genesis theme of the reversal of the primogeniture. Okay, so he's talking about something else. Now we're going to see that Ephraim and Manasseh are reversed. We'll get to that in a second. Note that he already places Ephraim the younger before Manasseh when he names Joseph's sons. The fact that Reuven has violated Jacob's concubine and Shimon with Levi has initiated the massacre at Shem may suggest that they are deemed worthy to be undisputed first and second in line among Jacob's inheritors. The language Jacob uses, moreover, is a formula of legal adoption, just as the gesture of placing the boys on the old man's knees, see verse 12, is a ritual gesture of adoption. Adoption is dictated by the fact that Ephraim and Manasseh will become tribes, just as if they were sons of Jacob. Okay, so Robert Alter touches on what we're saying, but doesn't go into as great detail as what we were speaking about. Okay. Okay. Oops. Okay. Verse 6. מולדתך אשר הולדת אחריהם לך יהיו על שם אחיהם יקראו בנחלתם. So anyone who's born to you, I'll paraphrase, anyone who's born to you afterwards, so Ephraim and Manasseh are mine, but any children or any sons that are born to you afterwards, they're going to be Hashem Hakhamim yikra'u b'nachalatam. They're going to be not raised up that level. They're going to inherit according to the next generation. In other words, they're going to get part of Joseph's inheritance, but they're not going to directly inherit as if they're as if they're sons of a Jacob. Okay, verse 7. وأني ببوئي من فدان ميتا علي رحل بأرץ كنعان ودرخ بعود كبرات أرץ לבוא אפרתה وأكبرها שם ודרך אפרת he bet Lahim. So then he says, when I was coming from Padan is the area where Haran, where Lavan was, Rachel died on me in the land of Canaan, basically on the way to Ephrat, and I buried her there. So he mentions Rachel, right? Which further implies that the reason he's doing this is because he considers Joseph to be his true firstborn because he's the son of Rachel, right? Now he's speaking to Joseph. He's recalling, I'm sure Joseph already knows this, but he's recalling what happened to his mother, Rachel. So, yeah, Joseph effectively lost his mother when he was 17 years old. He never saw his mother again, right? After he was 17 years old. Pretty sad. But that is the fact. All right. What do you want? Okay, I'll get you something in a couple minutes. I'll take a break. I'll make you something. Okay. What do you want to make? Peanut butter and jelly?
Yes.
Go ahead. You can make peanut butter and jelly. Just make sure that all the heaters are off. Okay. But if you wait 10 minutes, I'll warm you up the rest of the stuff we ate for breakfast. You can have that. Want to do that instead? It's another one of the sausages and another one of the borek. No, Volk, I have to do this now. Okay, so please, okay, I'll get up in a second. I'll warm it up. Okay. In fact, what you could do is you could just turn on the oven regular settings. Okay, and I'll grab it for you. Okay. Yeah, regular settings. Wait, hold on. Before you do, hello. Make sure that this heater's on. Make sure the heater in the back room is off. It's off. Okay, and in the bathroom. Okay, then go ahead. Then turn the oven on. That's fine. Yad, and put a timer for 7 minutes. Okay. Yad Yisrael et bnei Yosef vayomer mi ele. And Israel saw the sons of Joseph and said, "Who are these?" Well, didn't he just say Ephraim and Manasseh are going to be on the same level as the other? I mean, he's already seen them, right? So it's kind of rhetorical, right? Because it's a setup. Oops. It's a setup for what's going to happen next, right? Or alternatively, we could say perhaps that Yaakov can't see which one is which, because that's what Yosef assumes. We'll see in a second. All right. Verse 9. Vayomer Yosef el aviyu, Bonai hem asher natan li Elohim bazeh, Vayomar hem na elai wa avarachem wa avarachem. Okay, and Yosef said to his father, "These are my children, who God has given to me here." Okay, and he said, and then Jacob said, "Take them to me, and I would like to bless them." Verse 10. وعيني إسرائيل يقبضوا لزقد لو يخال لرؤوت ويجيش قطام إلاو ويشاق لهم ويحبك لهم. And the eyes of Israel were very heavy. Okay, so just to point out very quickly, they were in the same state as his father Yitzchak when Jacob came, when Jacob himself came to trick Yitzchak. Okay, so they were very heavy from old age. In other words, he couldn't really see well, right? Lo yichalu lirot, he couldn't see. Vayechi otam elau vayeshk lahem vayahbek lahem. So Joseph brings the two sons close to Jacob, and Jacob kisses them and hugs them. Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef re'o fonecha lo pilabti wahine hir'ah oti Elohim gan et zer echa. And Israel says to Joseph, Volky, can you do me a favor? Just sit down somewhere, okay? Because I can't work with just the one. Okay? Okay, turn on the oven and then set a timer for 7 minutes. Okay, so Joseph says, "I never even prayed that I would see your face, and now I'm seeing the face of your seed, of your children." Right? Lots to say about that. Let's move ahead. Why say Yosef otam ma'im birakau why yishtahu le'apau arza. And so Joseph took him out from before his knees. I guess they were sitting on. I guess they were little boys at this point. They were sitting on his knees. Although we can figure out exactly how old they were as well. Probably says they were born. Was not. Maybe not so little. At any rate, we're not going to go back and figure that out now. And they bowed down on their faces or on their noses, literally to the ground. So they prostrated themselves before their grandfather Jacob. Talking about Ephraim and Manasseh. ויקח יוסף את שניהם את אפרים בימינו משמאל ישראל ואת מנשה בשמאלו מימין Israel. Why? Ageshelau. So Yosef took the two. So Ephraim in his right hand, on the left of Israel, and Manasseh in his left hand on the right of Israel. Why did he do that? Okay, the right always represents the right hand of God, right? The right represents the superior position in ancient Israel or in the ancient Near East. Okay, Manasseh is the elder. Manasseh was born before Ephraim. Okay, so Manasseh is, it says very clearly here, very specifically, in very detailed fashion, that Manasseh is caused to approach or pushed into the direction of Yaakov's right hand, and Ephraim, the younger one, to Yaakov's left hand. Because Manasseh is the firstborn. So Manasseh is, again, is supposed to get the blessing of the firstborn and the double portion. But we have another reversal, which we've seen so many times in the Torah, right? Such as the reversal of Esav and Yaakov, where Yaakov buys the birthright from Esav, and so many other examples as well, which is spoken about many times before. וישלח ישראל את ימינו וישב על ראש אפרים והוא הצעיר ואת שמאלו על ראש מנשה והשכל את ידיו כי מנשה הבכור. So Yaakov, basically, to make a long story short, he crossed his hands like this. He put his left hand on Manasseh, no, on Ephraim. He put his right hand on Ephraim, and he put his left hand on Manasseh, right? So he crossed his hands like this. Skel et yado, and that's the word here. Skel, we understand from that, and maybe from other places, is to cross, right? It only appears a number of times. But as skel, skilu, I see it only appearing as sakel. Here it is, kal. That's in a different context. Skil, yaskil. Anywho, I assume from the context, I don't see it anywhere appearing meaning to cross, but that's the way it's understood here. And that's a bit of a problematic translation, but we'll just leave it at that for now. Okay. Could be related to, again, it is related to laskil, which means to become wise. So maybe he, deliberately did this with his hands instead of he crossed his hands. At any rate, basically what he's doing is he's going to reverse the order, right? He's going to make Manasseh the second-born and Ephraim the firstborn, even though in reality Ephraim was the firstborn and Manasseh was the second. So he's reversing the order of the firstborn, this theme that we've seen so many times before and we'll see so many times after in the Torah. Shalom, Itan Avior. I don't know, is that my friend Eric? I don't know who Itan Avior is. So, verse 15. ויברך את יוסף ויאמר האלוהים אשר התהלכו אבותיי לפניו אברהם ויצחק האלוהים הרואה אותי מעודי עד היום הזה. So Yosef יברך את Yosef. So Jacob blesses Yosef and he says, God, אשר התהלכו אבותיי לפניו Avraham Yitzhak, so God, he doesn't call him by his name, he just calls him by his title, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Yitzhak walked. Elohim ro'eh oti, the God who shepherds me, me'odi ad hayom hazeh, from my birth or from my, from as long as I've existed, as long as I've been around to this very day. And then Hamal Hagoel oti mikol ra yivarech et הנערים ויקרא בהם שמי ושם אבותי אברהם יצחק וידעו לרוב בקרב הארץ. So now he says something very interesting. Hamalach hagoli oti mikol ra. He doesn't say God. Now he switches over from Ha-Elohim to Hamalach. So what the heck is going on here? The angel who has redeemed me from all evil, may he bless these youths, talking about Ephraim and Manasseh. V'yikare behem shemi, and may my name be called upon them. Shem avotai Abraham Yitzchak. Okay, so this idea of the name being called upon them, it's a bit detailed. I'm not sure we're going to get into it right now, but this is a phrase that's used in a number of places throughout the Torah. Okay, and may this should translate as related to the word dag, fish. So may they be like schools of fish, or maybe they be like the fish in the ocean, as great, as numerous as the fish in the ocean, Kerev haaretz, in the midst of the land, right? Perhaps speaking about the land of Israel, or perhaps speaking about the earth in general. Okay, so what is going on here? Why is he suddenly switching over? He's speaking to God, right? Okay, so okay, just give me 1 second, everyone. I'm just going to take a break for 1 split second. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. So let's listen to a very nice song, which you probably all heard. But we'll hear it again. Oops. Where's it? It's probably not hanging Hebrew keyboard. There we go.
יברך את הנערה ויקרא בהפשרי השם אבותם השם אבותם אברהם ויצחק ויתגורר
All right, so that was that verse in song form. Stop the screen and reset it. Okay, so what is this idea of Hamalach go Eloti, the angel who redeems me, right? Well, the fact of the matter is that most of the time, if not all of the time, when God is interacting with people on this earth, he's generally interacting through an angel. Okay? It's a huge topic to get into. Okay? We know, for instance, just to point out maybe one or two verses that kind of imply this idea somewhat. So, oops. No, it's not there. It's Numbers. I have to find out. Wait 1 second. Let's do it this way. Mm-hmm. So this kind of implies this idea, right? So this is God rebuking Aaron and Miriam for talking about Moses, for gossiping about Moses. When there's a prophet among you, I, Yahweh, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams, but this is not true of my servant Moses. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of Yahweh. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Right? So this implies that Moses gets direct communication with Yahweh, but other prophets do not. Okay? And we see many times that when God is interacting with people, it says that God speaks to such and such, but then we see it's actually an angel, a malach, speaking to such and such. Okay? So I think that's what's going on here. I think that that this is basically what Yaakov is saying. Okay, Yaakov is saying that yes, it's God protecting him, but he's doing this protection or redeeming him by sending angels or by these intermediaries known as angels. Okay, we could see this also. Maybe one other example of this would be in when Jacob is wrestling the angel. Okay, so that's going to be in in Genesis. Let's see, 28. No, it's before 28. No, I'm sorry, not 28. 35. A little bit before that. 33. For that. Okay, let's see here. So we know that God wrestles with the angel, right? But then what does he say? He says, so Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared, right? But he didn't see God. He wrestled with an angel, right? So this is kind of, and you could see this in many places throughout the Torah. There's this kind of interchange, or not interchange is not the word I'm looking for. exchange between angels and God. They're used interchangeably. I guess it is the word I'm looking for. And so the conclusion from that is that essentially when we see God interacting with human beings, even if it says God said such and such, that most of the time it's really an angel that's doing that. But it just says God because that angel is the representative. Malach just means a messenger. Okay, that is the messenger of God. So God interacts with human beings through messengers. And so that when Jacob says this here, Malach hago eloti, made the angel that redeems me from all evil, bless the youths. It's basically his way of saying, may God do it, but God redeems or God interacts with human beings through angels. All right. So here we are in verse 17. Any questions, any comments so far? Anybody want to add anything? Okay, we'll go on. V'yar Yosef ki yashit aviv yad yimino. I'll probably go, you know what, I think what I'm going to do now is we'll go down to the end of this chapter, doing a bit more detailed analysis. And then for 49 and 50, for the last two chapters, I'll just read what I often do when we're kind of running out of time and just give very brief analysis of certain things, okay? Let's get a little Robert Alter just to mix it up a bit. So, all right, Robert Alter says in verse 15, the Masoretic text has illogically, he blessed Yosef. But them as object of the verb is reflected in the Septuagint, the Syriac, and the Vulgate, right? So the Septuagint, the Syriac, and the Vulgate obviously understood that as a mistake. And that is in verse 15. But I don't think it's a mistake. This is typical of what you'll see in these various translations. You'll also see it in the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Samaritan Torah. Anything that doesn't fit logically for them, they assume it's a mistake. But that's really because it's almost as if they're trying to correct it. I think in the case of the Samaritans, especially, to make the Torah more logical. But the Torah doesn't necessarily need to be logical in the way that we human beings see it. It's logical in a kind of ancient Israelite form of logic. So I don't think there's any problem here whatsoever. And so whenever we see a lot of corrections in the Samaritan, you'll see that they're trying to basically bring it in line with what I would call kind of like Western linear kind of thinking, right? So here what Robert Alter is saying, okay, is that it doesn't make sense. He didn't bless Yosef, he blessed Ephraim and Manasseh, okay? But Ephraim and Manasseh are the representatives of Yosef, right? They're being brought up one level. They're taking the place of Yosef. Ephraim and Manasseh are basically the tribe of Yosef is split into Ephraim and Manasseh. So I don't think there's any contradiction here whatsoever. It's just the kind of more ancient Israelite way of thinking about it, rather than all of these corrections, right? The Septuagint was Greek, right? Alexandrian Greek to be exact, and Vulgate was Latin. Syriac was, of course, Syriac. So they're trying to basically, correct what they perceive as mistakes. But it's almost like arrogance to think that the original text was necessarily wrong. And I think that this is the original text. It's not, doesn't need to be corrected, and there's no contradiction here. Yosef could be used interchangeably with Ephraim and Manasseh because they are taking the place of Yosef, Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's just a response to Robert Alter's comment. Verse 16, Robert Alter says, Jacob, after recapitulating the story of his personal providence in the first line of the blessing poem, invokes the benediction of the patriarchal line, and then going back still further in the biblical story, the promise or injunction of fertility from the creation story. That's where he says, Vayidgu le'rov, which Robert Alter translates as, let them teem multitudinous. Okay. And he blessed them on that day. So that's verse 20. We're not up to that yet. So let's continue. V'yar Yosef ki yashit aviv yad yamino al rosh Ephraim. So Yosef saw that his father laid down hand his right hand on the head of Ephraim. Right? So the right hand was supposed to go on Menashe. Menashe was to Jacob's right side. Ephraim was to Jacob's left side because Menashe was the first. Ephraim was the second born. So Yaakov, we saw Chelet Yadao. He crossed his hands. And now Yosef notices this. He sees that he's putting his right hand on Ephraim and his left hand on Menashe. And this was not a good thing in his eyes. And he lifts, he picks his father's hand up to correct it, right? Just paraphrasing again. Verse 18. ויאמר יוסף אל אביהו, לא כן אבי, כי זה הבכור שים ימינך על ראשו. And Yosef said to his father, this is not right, my father, because this is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. So basically, from Yosef's point of view, his father has dementia or something like that. His father can't see, and is not thinking correctly. And Volky, why don't you feed the cats? I would do it now, or I would let Sufi out at least because she's crying. Okay, you have it all locked up in there. What? That's true, but maybe I don't know. Just leave her there. I guess she's already crying. Then let her outside for a little while. Yomer Yosef el Aviv. I got to do this now. Lo chen avi, ki ze habachor sim yimcha al rosho. So basically, in Yosef's eyes, his father's blind and his father's demented. His father has dementia, right? He's acting like an old fool. He's crossed his hands and everything's all messed up. And so Yosef is trying to correct it. V'yima'en aviu, yomer yadati bini, yadati kam, gam hu yihye le'am, v'gam hu yichdal, wa'ulam achiu ha'katon yichdal mimenu, zira'on yihye bero ha'goyim. And so his father refused, and he said, I know, son, I know. Also this one, referring now to Menashe, the physical firstborn, will also become a nation. Well, does he become a nation? No, he becomes a tribe. So this just shows that when the word Am is used, it refers not necessarily to different nations, but to tribes. And therefore, when it says that when Abraham is given the blessing that you will be a kahal amim, you'll be a multitude of nations, or an assemblage or a congregation of nations, it's not really, in my opinion, it's not talking about, it may be talking about also the descendants of Ishmael and even the descendants of Esav, but it may just be talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. Because here we see that the tribe is called an Am, okay? Usually translated as a nation, but in this case, it's clearly speaking about the tribe. A tribe is considered an Am, what's usually translated as a nation. And I think all of the blessings that go, my rule in the Torah is all of the blessings that go to the patriarchs are speaking only about the line of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes of Israel. So if Abraham is given the blessing, your descendants will inherit, this land, he's not speaking about all of Abraham's descendants. He's speaking about the descendants through Isaac and through Jacob, right? So whenever we see a blessing, for the most part, being given to one of the patriarchs, that's going to happen in later generations. It's speaking only about through the line Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They're not general blessings for all of the descendants of Abraham, right? In fact, we know, for instance, that Ishmael gets a second blessing. I'm sorry. So yes, this he's going to be great, Menashe, but his little brother is going to be even greater. And his seed will be Melo HaGoyim, the greatness of the nations, a multitude of nations. I don't know, there are different ways. It's kind of a tricky little phrase. Let's get a couple of different translations. So let's look first. So this is Genesis 48:19. Let's see how the NIV translates it, or I'll just go to Carolyn. So 48:19. His younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations. Melo Goyim. NLV, multitude of nations, multitude of nations, multitude of nations, multitude of nations. You get the idea, right? Fullness of nations. It's really a more literal translation. a populous nation, right? So whenever you see different translations having being different from each other, that usually implies, not always, because sometimes they're just expressing themselves differently, but it usually implies that it's a difficult word or a difficult phrase to understand. It usually implies that the original interpreters don't really know what this means. So we can go to Ibn Ezra, because if anyone's going to give us a little clarity on it, it's going to be the Ibn Ezra. He's an amazing, amazing, amazing commentator. I call him the anti-Rashi, because Rashi's a bumbling idiot. But Ibn Ezra, okay, let me do this, okay? But Ibn Ezra is an amazing, amazing commentator. I have so much respect for this guy. I mean, it's just, well, it doesn't mean I always agree with him. There have been some times where I've disagreed. Bulky, I've got to do this now, okay? So we're talking about Genesis 48:19. Let's see what Ibn Ezra, if anything, has to say. Goyim rabim yatsu mimenu. So he's basically saying a multitude of nations. Okay, many nations shall descend from him. The verse reads Melo Goyim. Its literal translation is the fullness of the nation. Ibn Ezra points out that Melo, fullness, is to be rendered as many, a multitude. Phil Warg, whoever the heck that is, asks, who were the many nations descended from Ephraim? Fair enough question. So Phil Warg, whoever the heck Phil Warg is, sounds like an alien from a different planet. Phil Warg asks, but whoever he is, he asks a very good question, right? Were there really tribes or nations that descended from Ephraim? Answer, not really. Although we can say that Ephraim represented the northern kingdom, and he had a large territory and many different cities, so maybe in that sense. But Volky, I can't do things that way. I'm sorry. If you want to do your own Torah study, more than welcome to, but you can't interrupt. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm very sorry. Okay. So below Goyim, we don't really know what that means. Let's look at. We're sick of Robert Alter, right? Let's look at someone else. Let's go with Hertz. Rabbi Hertz. I always point out this is the Pentateuch I grew up on. When I was dragged to a shul as a child against my will, kicking and screaming every Shabbat, where the only thing I did was eat Kiddush food and make lots of trouble because I had no interest in Judaism whatsoever, especially not the conservative Judaism that I grew up with. Then this was the Pentateuch we used. So, all right, let's see here. Skip ahead, skip ahead, skip ahead. Oops. 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 Let's try this again. Why is it not letting me borrow? Refresh. Log in and borrow. Actually, I don't have to log in. All right. I guess we'll have to do this another time. Every hour. Availability. 1 sec here. Huh. Well, I'm not going to do this now, I guess. Unless. One second. That didn't work. Yeah, there's this. Let's try one more time. I have it on caps lock this way. 1 second. Let's try this one more time. No, not working. All right, forget it. I'll have to fix that later. Okay, so all right, we got Ibn Ezra. So then I guess we'll have to do a little bit of Robert Alter on that one if he has anything to say. No, he doesn't. So let's go on. So Manoah Goyim, Ibn Ezra says a multitude of nations, like a Kahal Amim, same idea. I think he's right, actually. Even though the question by Phil Warg is a fair enough question. Melo Goyim seems to be the same idea as Kahal Amim, right? And we even saw above that phrase being used, right? Okay, let's go on. Verse 20, Vayevarchem bayom hahu, lemor becha, yivorech Yisrael, lemor. And so he blessed them on that day, saying, through you, Israel will bless, lemor. Again, we see through you. Who's through you, right? He's talking to Yosef, right? It's not bachem. This is a singular. Bacha means through you or in you, and it's a singular. In you, singular, talking to one person. This goes back to what we saw before about this correction that supposedly the Septuagint, the Vulgate, and the Syriac translations made, where they said, oh, it doesn't make sense to say Yosef because he's not blessing Yosef, but he is blessing Yosef. When he blesses Ephraim and Menashe, he's effectively blessing Yosef, right? So this singular picks up on that idea. He's speaking about Yosef, it seems here. So he blessed them, that's plural, blessed them, plural, on that day, saying, through you, singular, right? Now speaking about Yosef. So we see even more evidence for the fact that those corrections that are made by the Septuagint, by this Samaritan Pentateuch, by the Vulgate, etc., are often just, trying to insert, let's say, modern logic onto ancient Israelite logic. Okay, it's almost an arrogance, I would say. So here, lemor becha, speaking to Yosef. Here, yivarchem. Okay, I hope the point is understood, right? So the plural and the singular being used interchangeably, meaning that Yosef, a singular person, is being used interchangeably with Ephraim and Menashe, and therefore there's no contradiction whatsoever where it says in verse 15 that Yaakov blessed Yosef when in fact he was blessing Ephraim and Menashe. Blesses Yosef by blessing Ephraim and Menashe, and vice versa. Okay, maybe not vice versa. Okay, Yivarech Yisrael lemor. So this is really the first, shall we say, scripted blessing that we see in the Torah. There are a number of them. We should even make a list. In fact, I think I will make a list in a second. Okay? For instance, when you bring the first fruits to the Kohen, you're supposed to say, Arami Oved Avi. Okay? When the Kohanim, one of whom we have here in the room right now, I believe, if Avior is who I think he is, then you say the Kohanic blessing, etc. Right? There are certain scripted things to say in the Torah, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the first one, the entire Torah. So let's add another thingy. Yes, official name of this is thingy. Call it scripts in the Torah. Scripts in the Torah. So we've got column verse, script, text. Let's call it script. Get rid of this and this. Get rid of all of these. So in Genesis 48:20, right? So this is a thing that we're supposed to say. In other words, what do I mean by script? Something that the Torah tells us to say word for word, right? So let's grab that, stick it over here, and there we go. Okay? So when we get to other ones, we can always add them. I believe that's the first one in the entire Torah. I can't think of one that comes before it. And he placed Ephraim, the younger one, before Menashe, the older one, right? He reversed the order. So the blessing reverses the order as well. ויאמר ישראל אל יוסף, הנה אנוכי מת, וחיה אלוהים עמכם, וישיב אתכם אל ארץ אבותיכם, ואני נתתי לך שכם אחד על אחיך אשר לקחתי מיד האמורי בחרבי ובקשתי. Okay, so Israel said to Joseph, I'm going to die, and may God be with you, or God will be with you and will return you. So here's imachem, you return you plural, speaking about all of Jacob's descendants, el eretz avotechem, to the land of their fathers. And I'm giving you shchem echad, usually translated as one shoulder or one portion above your brothers. Okay, well let's pick this apart a little bit. Let's go to Ibn Ezra. Okay. So, Shchem Echad, Yesh Omrim, Ki Al Ir Shchem Ramaz, Shkami Aita Livnei Yosef. So I'll just read the English. Some say that Shchem portion alludes to the city of Shchem, which was in the portion of the land allotted to Joseph. So it's referring explicitly to Shchem, right? If that's the case, we have a bit of a problem, right? So Shchem did fall within the land, within the territory of Ephraim, okay? However, if it is indeed the city of Shchem, then we have a bit of a problem. So Yaakov says, "Lakachti miyadi meyad emori b'charbi b'kashti," which I took from the hands of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. Did Jacob take the city of Shechem from the Amorites with his sword and with his... I don't think so. If I remember correctly, what happened is that Dinah was raped by Shechem, and then Shimon and Levi went in there and told them all to circumcise, and then when they were suffering from their circumcisions, went in and killed them all with the sword. And then Yaakov rebukes them, by the way, not because Yaakov thought that what they did was wrong, but because Yaakov was afraid that he would become a stink in the eyes of the people living there, and they would team up against him and basically take revenge. So he got the heck out of town, and his next stop after that, as we saw, that was in Genesis 35, I believe, was back to Bethel, back to Luz, where he then spoke to God again, right? That's then referred to, as we saw in Genesis chapter 47. So this didn't happen. So that's one hint that he's not talking about Shechem city, right? Oops, I clicked on a mistake, so as long as I did. Why is this not coming up? Why is this thing not coming up? Let's go back. No, I can't vote. I can't think if someone's sitting right here. Okay, you could sit over there, but if you bother me, then I'm gonna have to ask you to listen. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Shechem. I think it's a problem with the internet right now. It happens sometimes, especially on the weekends here. Give me 1 second. Okay, we gotta wait a second. Having problems with the internet. Malach hagoeluti b'kol ramo, yivarech et hanyarim, there we go. So shoulder. We know that Shechem is a shoulder. It speaks about Saul being one shoulder above everybody else. But here, portion. general back, shoulder, bearing burdens, statement of Saul's height. Uh-huh. All right. Fair enough. So yes, literally it means shoulder. And the Ibn Ezra is basically going to say that, right? So then he says, so he goes on here, he says, al Hashem. So when it says that I took it with my sword and my bow, so first of all, I guess he's going to get to it now, okay? He took it with his sword and his bow. He says, al Hashem, okay, first to God. Kasher Amar David, Migini Vekeren Ishai. He's my shield and the horn of my salvation. That's Psalms 18. I'll just read the English just to speed it up a bit. However, I believe that Shechem means a portion, and Shechem Echad is to be rendered as one portion. The word Shechem is related to the word Shichmam, their shoulders, and Shechem, shoulder, in upon their shoulders, Exodus 12:34, and to serve him with one consent, Shechem Echad, Shechem Echad, Shechem Echad, Zephaniah 3:9. We'll take it Zephaniah 3:9. So in other words, the Ibn Ezra is rejecting the idea that this is referring to the city of Shechem. In fact, there's no evidence to say that it refers to the city of Shechem. And the idea here that Yaakov took it with his sword and his bow does not fit with the narrative that we saw earlier in Genesis 35. It was not 35, whatever, thereabouts, when it was actually Shimon and Levi who tricked the people of Shechem and then killed them. Okay, so that's the Ibn Ezra, and we could take a look, just to fortify this, we could take a look at Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. Let's do that, just for kicks and giggles. So Zephaniah 3:9. Right. So perfect example, as always, Ibn Ezra. I think he learned to ply his skill from other commentators, and including, if I'm not mistaken, I think we read this, non-Jewish commentators, that they had a certain way of analyzing. It might have been Muslim commentators that had a certain way of analyzing the Quran, and that's how he learned to analyze the Torah in this very, very precise way. But he is just an amazing commentator. Okay, ki az afoch el amim safa brura. Then I shall literally turn over, but I shall, I guess, make for the nations a clear language. Nikro kulam b'shem Yahweh. I will make the nations call in a clear language upon the name of God, the name of Yahweh. Le'avdo Shechem echad, and to worship Him with one portion or in one way, right? So this is clearly, when it says Shechem echad, it's not referring to the city of Shechem, right? And it's the same phrase that we have here, right? Shechem echad. And that's exactly why the Ibn Ezra brilliantly, and he did this without a computer, without a concordance, without any of this stuff. He chooses Zephaniah 3:9 to show that here it clearly could not be referring to the city of Shechem, that it means in one voice or something like that, or in one, in one way, it's translated as. And here we have exactly the same phrase, Shechem echad, proof that this also means one way or one portion, right? So that is the Ibn Ezra's proof. It is an excellent proof, and in my opinion, it's a slam dunk. It shows very clearly that this phrase Shechem echad, which doesn't fit into the narrative in the context here anyway, just means an extra portion and is not referring to so many commentators. Probably Rashi. Let's see what Rashi has to say, just to contrast the good commentator with a useless, horrible commentator. No, concordances were not around until like the 13th or 14th centuries. I don't think so. As far as I know, you can look it up. If you want to do a little research, let me know. I don't know. Maybe there was some kind of primitive concordance, or maybe it was on the previous commentaries. I'm not sure. Well, I got to do this now, okay? So let's take a look at Rashi on this one. So where do we go? Rashi. Now we should break in some other medieval commentators as well eventually, but stick with this. So this is Genesis 48:22. And Rashi says, of course, the idiot Rashi says, Shem mamash, itiya lecha chelek echad dera al achicha. So to translate, Shechem echad al achicha, Jacob meant by the word Shechem, the actual city of Shechem, and said, this shall be to you one portion additional to what you will receive together with your brothers. So that is an idiotic statement. It is the opposite of Ibn Ezra, who's logical and thought out and always hits the arrow right on the bullseye. And Rashi is, you just see, there's something, the way he thinks is just, it's off. There's something really weird about it. And yet the rabbis themselves who are off, they consider him to be the pinnacle of all rabbinical commentaries and laughingly say that he represents this pshat, that he represents the simple meaning of the words. His commentary is so far from the simple meaning of the words that it's a ridiculous statement. So with my sword and with my bow, this is what Rashi says. When Shimon and Levi slew the inhabitants of Shechem, all the surrounding nations gathered together to join in battle against them, and Jacob girded on his weapons to war against them. That directly contradicts the Torah. It says that Jacob was worried that this would happen, so he left Shechem, and God put the fear of God on the inhabitants, and so he was able to get away from Shechem. So this is actually directly contradicts the text of the Torah. Another explanation of this verse, Shechem Echad, this refers to the birthright, blah, blah, blah. I can't take it anymore. All right, that's Rashi. Okay, that's the end of Genesis 48. It has been close to over a 3-hour study now. So what I'm going to do is just read through 49 and 50, which thank God, because 49 is one of the most difficult chapters to understand because it's all ancient biblical poetry and nobody has any idea of what many of these words and phrases are saying. Well, the words maybe, but the phrases. There are a lot of idioms. There's a lot of imagery, and if you read the different commentators, I mean, as I said before, when you read translations and you see that there are many different translations, it's a sign that the interpreters didn't really know the meaning of the original words. You'll see this to an extreme in this chapter in many cases. Okay, it's very obscure poetic language, and it's very, very hard to understand. So thank God I don't have to do it. I'm just going to cop out by just reading through it, and you can follow along in your favorite English translation, and I will save myself the heartache and the trouble of going through this each year and trying to figure out what does this word mean and what does this phrase mean, because nobody knows. They have ideas, but they don't know for sure. Okay. Verse 1, so this is the blessing that Jacob gives his sons. Vayikra Yaakov el banav, vayomer he'ostu, va'agida lachem et asher yikra etchem be'aharit ha'yomim. So it's poetry. It almost reminds me of like in Deuteronomy, where Moses gives his speeches, right? Gather together, and I shall tell you, shall tell you what you're to do when you enter the land. It's the same kind of speech almost, right? Yikabsu washimu b'nei Yaakov washimu el Yisrael avichem. So he starts with Reuven. Reuven is the firstborn. He even says that Reuven bechori. Reuven is my firstborn. Ata kohi wa rashitoni. You are my strength and the beginning of my prowess. Yet there said כמים, אל תתר, כי עלית משי אביך, אז חילת יצורי, voila. Pahaz, wishy-washy, unreliable, as unsolid as water. Al tutar, you will not succeed, you will not get ahead. Kelita mishkave avicha, you rose up, you went up to the couch, the bed of your father. We see that explicitly that it's Shimon, that Reuven slept with Bilhah, one of his father's concubines. Okay, should we get a quick Robert Alter on that one? Verse 4, you'll no more prevail. The verb here may mean you'll not remain. Upon that meaning, reference to the early disappearance of the tribe of Reuven, perhaps before the period of monarchy. Okay. The place where your father lay, the plural form is used, mishkave viha, is an explicitly sexual connotation, whereas the singular mishkav can also simply mean a place where one sleeps. You profaned my couch, you mounted. The translation here, it means ala to alita, you mounted, though there is some possibility that the archaic poetic style permitted this sort of abrupt switch in pronomial reference. Okay, fine. Whatever. Verse 5. Shimon u'alewi ahim le hamas mechorotehem. So your wares are instruments of violence. In other words, it seems to be a reference to what they did in Shechem. Yisodam al tovo nashi biki holam al tehad kivodi ki be'apom hargu ish uberesonam ikru shor. So let's get a little Robert Alter on that one because it's a little bit cryptic. The meaning of macharotem is highly uncertain, so we're going to see this a lot in this chapter, right? The translation here contextually links the term with the root machar to sell. And that's the way it's usually translated. Not their trade. It's usually translated as their hamas macharotem, their wares, but close enough. Okay. They tore down ramparts. With many critics, the translation here reads shur, a poetic term for wall, instead of shor, ox. As the Masoretic term has it, the verb, if it refers to oxen, would mean to maim or to hamstring. It was sometimes the ancient practice to hamstring the captured war horses of an enemy. But it would have been foolish to hamstring captured oxen, which could be put to peaceful use. Moreover, since Jacob is speaking of the massacre at Shechem, the narrative there explicitly noted that the cattle and other livestock were carried off, not maimed. Well, it could just mean uproot, like take away also, but okay. All right. But the main point is Robert Alter does believe that this is referring to the slaughter at Shechem. Arur, Epam, ki az, wa evratam, ki kashata, Hakham Melech, afitzim, Yisrael. Verse 8, so as he said, now we get to Yehuda. So Yehuda is essentially the second born. He gets basically the second position after Yosef, which are broken into Ephraim and Manasseh. Yehuda, ta, Yuducha, Achicha, Yadcha, Be'aref, Oivecha, Ishtahawu, Lechan, B'nei Avicha. So I guess clear prophecy for the Davidic kingdom. Your brothers will pay homage to you or recognize you or thank you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. The sons of your father will bow down before you, right? And of course, we know that Yehuda becomes the Davidic dynasty comes from Yehuda. So prophecy. Gur Aryeh Yehuda miteref beni alita Korah Ravas ki Aryeh uki Lavi mi. And our cat, by the way, is named Lavi, and he is the best little cat in the world. This is sweetheart. I love that little thing. So, Gur Aryeh Yehuda miteref beni alita. I used to have a picture hanging in Israel when I first go. I had this phrase on a painting that someone had done, and I hung it in my room. So this has a lot of meaning to me, actually, this particular phrase. Verse 10. Lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda מחוקק מבין רגליו עד כי יבוא שילה ולא יכחק עמים. A lot to say there, but we're going to move ahead because it's getting late. I'm going to stop in about 10 minutes. أسري לגפן עירו ולסריקה בני עיתונו כיבס ביין לבושו בדם ענבים את סותו. 12. הכלילי עיניים מיין ולבן שיניים מחלב. Now we're up to זבולון. זבולון לחוף ימים משכון, והוא לחוף עניות, וירכותו על סידון. Sidon, right? That's in southern Lebanon. You can actually see the outskirts of Sidon from the current northern boundary of Israel. Yisachar Hamor Gorim Roves Ben Ha Mish Batayim. Verse 15. Yar Minuha Kitov Wa'et Ha'ares Ki Na'emo Wa'et Shichmo Nisbol Wa'ihi Lemas Koved. Up to Dan, one of the sons of the concubines. Dan Yadin Amo Ke'ahad Shiftei Yisrael. So that's a nice blessing for Dan because he's a son of a concubine, son of Zilpah, I believe. And he's going to be like one of the tribes of Israel. Right? So, because the sons of the concubines are basically second status or second tier status. That's what they are, whether you like it or not. Vahid Dan Nahash Ale Derech Fifon Ale Orah Hanoshech Vesus Waipol Rochvo Ahor. Oops. Li Yeshua Khan Kiviti Yahweh. Here we have the use of Yahweh as we do many times, even before the name is officially revealed in Exodus chapter 3. Oops. Gad, Gadud, Yehudenu, Wahu, Wahu, Yahud, Arkev. So that's a blessing for God. Me Asher Shemeno, Lahmo, Wahu, Yiten, Ma'adane Melech. Now up to Naphtali. Naphtali, Ay Yola, Shiluha, Noten Imre, not Imre, Shofir. And now we get up to Yosef, and it's a long one. Again, signifying and solidifying the idea that Yosef is essentially the firstborn. We've seen this now in a number of ways. Ben Porat, Yosef Ben Porat, Ale Ayin, Ayin Banot Sa'ada Ale Shor. So some people, there's all kinds of weird translations for this one. Some say that he was so good looking that girls climb up the wall to look at him, to put their eye on him. I think that's kind of pushing it. Whatever. If we had more time, we could go through some of the ideas of what that means. The other ones say that this is referring to grapevines reaching over the wall. So the whole idea is that these are very poetic. It's not prose, it's poetry, and it's very difficult to know what a lot of it means. Wa yimaruhu wa rubu wa is demuhu ba'ale haisim. Verse 24. What the she be'itan kashto wa yafuzu izra'e yadaw mideh avir Yaakov misham ro'e even Israel. Verse 25. Still continuing, by the way, with the blessing of Joseph. It's a long one. Me'el avicha ויעזרך ועת שדי ויברכך ברכות שמיים מעל ברכות תהום רובצת תחת ברכות שדיים ורחם. And one more line for Joseph. It's very difficult to understand that last verse. You can pick it apart. ברכות אביך גברו על ברכות הוריי עד תעבר גבעות עולם תיאן לראש יוסף ולקוד נזיר אחד. And now we're up to Benjamin, the last son. Binyamin Ze'ev, and this is why a lot of times you'll hear people called Binyamin Ze'ev. The two names go together. Binyamin Ze'ev Yitrof Baboker Yochal Ad Hu L'Arev Yahalek Shalal. That one's pretty easy to translate. כל אלה שבטי ישראל, 12 וזאת אשר דיבר להם אביהם, ויברך אותם איש אשר כברכתו ברך אותם. So those are the blessings that Jacob gives his 12 sons. Now we get into Jacob dying, and then basically some follow-up to end the book of Genesis. So let's go ahead, Wayitzau, and then I'm going to stop as soon as I'll try to read chapter 50. Sabotam, Wayomer Elehem, Ani, Nitsaf, El Ami, Kivruoti, El Avotai. Well, you can feed the cats, okay? Even if you have to let them hear, it doesn't matter, okay? Because it's late. I want them to eat. It's fine. It's fine. Just do it. El Avotai, El Hami'ora, Asher B'Stei, Efron Hiti. So bring me up, bury me in the cave of Machpelah, right? I don't know. I got to do this now, okay? So feed the cats. B'Mi'ara, Asher B'Stei, Machpelah, Asher Al Pnei. Do me a favor, can you close the bathroom door? Okay. Asher al pnei mamre be'eretz Kina'an. Asher qala Avraham et hasadeh me'et Efron Haiti la'ahuzat qaber. Shama qavru et Avraham wa'et Sarah ishto. Shama qavru et Ishaq wa'et Rivka ishto. Shama qavarti et Leah. You may hear some cat sounds because we're going to feed the cats now. Mikneh hasadeh we hami'ora asher bo me'et bnei hayt. ויכל יעקב לצוות את בניו ויאסף רכליו אל המיטה ויגבה ויאסף אל עמיו. Right, we spoke about this word before. ויגבה. So Jacob died. Chapter 50. ויפול יוסף על פני אביו ויחלהו וישק לו Yitzau Yosef it. Volky, please not on the phone now. Okay, the faster you feed the cats, then the less meowing there's going to be. All right, so put the phone down and just feed them already, please. All right. So Yosef it abadao it harofim it lahanot it aviv. So he's now embalmed, not embalmed. He's turned into a mummy, mummified. Ve'hatnu harofim. Fine, there's more in the garage. Volky, I got to do this now. I'm sorry. Okay. Yes. وَيَحَتَنُوا הרופאים את ישראל וימלאו לו 40 יום כי כן ימלאו ימי הנותנים ויבכו אותו מצרים 70 יום. Hey, lovey. Hey, baby. Hey, baby. ויעברו ימי. So we see here that the so it took 40 days to finish the mummification or the embalming, and then Egypt wailed for him for 70 days. Is that concurrent? Is that consecutive? Not sure. Probably consecutive. So if that's the case, then 110 days have passed, right, before they bring him up. Sufi girl, quiet. יעברו ימי בחיתו, וידבר יוסף אל בית פרעה, לאמור אם נא מצאתי חן בעיניכם, דברו נא באוזני פרעה, לאמור אבי השביעני, לאמור הנה אנוכי מת, הכיר בי אשר קראתי לי בארץ כנען שמה, תקברני ואתה אעלה נא ואקברה את אבי ואשובה. So Yosef is basically asking for some what they call in these days and age PTO, some paid time off, right? And it's ironic. Well, let me read the next verse and I'll say what I think is ironic. ויאמר פרעה עלה וקבור את אביך כאשר השביעך. So Pharaoh has no problem sending Joseph, Sufi girl, quiet, has no problem sending Joseph away and letting him disappear for God knows how long to go all the way up to Canaan and back. Remember, Joseph is second in charge of Egypt, so he's got a lot to do. But not only that, isn't this a contrast to when the Israelites later on, they want to leave Egypt, and the Pharaoh is afraid to let them go. All right, he's afraid that they're gonna go up and they're gonna join the enemies of Egypt and wage war against them. And in addition, they're gonna lose their slavery force. Right, so it shows the complete contrast. Right here, Israel, the fledgling nation of Israel, started basically as beloved guests within Egypt, and they ended up as hated, feared, and set aside for destruction, for extermination, essentially, right? And this Sufi girl, you're gonna get your food in 1 second, sweetheart. Okay? Isn't this a paradigm for every place we go, right? We come into, I don't know, Germany, right? Okay, we're treated well, we're beloved, we're put into high positions, and then eventually we become a stink in the eyes of the native population, and they turn on us and eventually want us out or want to kill us. And we can name how many nations have invited the Jews in, only a couple of hundred years later to throw them out? Poland, England, there's a whole bunch of different places, Portugal, Spain, you name it, right? It's the same story again. We come in, we're wanted, we're beloved, we're put in high positions. Eventually, the tables turn on us, and eventually we're either thrown out, persecuted, or killed. The same thing is now happening in the United States of America. Exactly the same thing is happening in the United States of America, because we don't belong in any of these countries, right? The curses that were given in the end of Leviticus, in Leviticus chapter 26, say that when you go into these other nations who worship gods of wood and stone, right, and you'll be constantly chased and oppressed. You'll be in such fear that at night you wish it was day, at day you wish it were night, right? So wherever we go in the galut, wherever we go in the exile, it may be good for a while, but it's always going to turn sour. It's always going to turn sour. And we repeat the same stupidity over and over again. We think this country is going to be different. Germany is going to be different. Germany was considered the bastion of liberalism and acceptance, and eventually look what happened. And the same thing will happen in the United States of America. It's already happening. If you read a lot of the news headlines, they talk about how anti-Semitism is reaching crisis proportions, and up, God knows, 300% in the past year. I don't remember what the numbers are, but all I could say is we ain't seen nothing yet. All right, so it's the same thing here in Egypt, right? It's the same pattern. Because where do we belong? In the land of Israel. Every other place, we're eventually going to have to be thrown out of one way or another. If we don't go on our own, we'll be thrown out the hard way. ויעל יוסף לקבור את אביו, ויעלו איתו כל עבדי פרעה, לפני ביתו וכל זקני ארץ מצרים. So maybe Pharaoh sent these guys up, keep an eye on Yosef as well. Sufi girl, quiet. Two. וכל בית יוסף ואחיו ובית אביו רק הפעם. Wow, so this is really interesting. So all of the house of Joseph and his brothers and the house of his father, they went up to bury their father Jacob, their patriarch Jacob. Who remained behind? The little ones, flocks, and the herds, okay? And again, I don't know if this is deliberate, but this certainly is in contrast, right? We remember, for instance, that when Moses says to Pharaoh later on that he wants to leave to worship God in the desert, that Pharaoh says, fine, but keep your flocks behind, Okay, I don't remember it says flocks and herds, but whatever it says, keep your livestock behind. And then Moshe has to say, no, we can't keep our livestock behind because we have to sacrifice to our God, and we don't know what he's going to need from us in terms of livestock sacrifices. So we have to bring him with us, right? So a lot of, I don't know if it's deliberate foreshadowing, but there's a lot of let's say at least coincidences here, foreshadowing to the book of Exodus. We are gam rechev gam parashim Vayechi hamachane kaved meod. So big entourage. I mean, it's like even bigger than a Snoop Dogg or I don't know, whatever stupid rappers popular these days. Okay. Wa yavo ad goren ha atad asher ba'ever hayarden. Bidu. So some people will say that this proves that the Torah was codified later. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm not even going to explain why it proves it, but Hamivin Yavin. Bidu Sham Misped Gadol we Chaved Meod we As Le Aviv Evel Shivat Yomim. So now so when they get up there, or when they get to Goren HaAtad, the threshing floor of Atad, on the other side of the Jordan, everybody up there. So there they had a great mourning ceremony for 7 days. So we do see a 7-day mourning ceremony, which is kind of repeated a number of times throughout the Torah. This is one of the places, I think this is the main place that the rabbis get the idea of sitting Shiva, which means sitting for 7 days after the death of a close loved one. Yar Yoshev Ha'aretz Na'ani Et Ha'ever Bahoren Ha'atad Vayomru Evel Kaved Ze LeMisrayim Al Ken Qarash Shema Avel Misrayim Asher Ba'ever Hayarden. Verse 12, Asu Banav Lo Ken Asher Siwam. Verse 13, Vaisu Oto Banav Artsa Kina'an Vayikbiru Oto Bima'ara Bami Orat Sede Hamachbelo Asher Qana Ev Araham Et Hasade Le Ahuzat Ever Me'et Efron Ha Haiti Ad Bnei Mamre. Verse 14. Why Yashav Yosef Mitzrayma Hu Ve'ahaw Nechol Ha'olim Ito Likbor Et Aviu Ahare Kovro Et Aviu. So now Yosef speaks to his brothers, calms them down. Vayir'u Hey Yosef Kimet Avihim V'yomru Lu Is Damenu Yosef V'hashev V'yeshev Yashiv Lanu Et Kol Ha'Ra'a Asher Gamalnu Oto. Hold on 1 second. Let me just turn off this noise. Be right back. Sufi girl, do you really think your crying is going to make it happen any faster? Huh? Do you? Alrighty. Verse 16. Vayisavu el Yosef lemor avicha siwa lifnei moto lemor. So now the brothers are a little bit worried that Yosef is going to take revenge on them. Kotomru le Yosef ana sa na pesha ahetcha v'chatotam ki ra'a rimalucha ve'atta sana lefesha avdei Elohei avicha ve'yech Yosef v'dibaram elav. He said, maybe he's insulted. Verse 18. ילכו גם how ויפלו לפניו ויאמרו הננו נאכל עבדים. So again, coming true of the original dream that Yosef had when he was 17 years old. יאמר אליהם יוסף אל תיראו כי תחת אלוהים אני ואתם חשבתם עליי רעה אלוהים, השווה לטובה למען עסוק כיום הזה להחיות עם רב. verse 21. ועתה אל תיראו אנוכי אכלכל אתכם ואת אפכם וינחם אותם, ידבר על ליבם. וישב יוסף במצרים הוא ובית אביו, ויהי יוסף 110 שנים. So we can add that now to this our list a little bit. Where was it? Oops. This is just close scripts. Okay, so we go back here. So we now see that Yosef was 110 years when he died. That's Genesis 50:22. Joseph's age when he dies. And so Joseph's age when he dies is 110. So Yaakov's age, well, would have been, I'll put in parentheses therefore, but so 56, 110 minus 56 is going to be 54. And so it's 54 years later, so 147 plus 54 is going to be 201. Oops. There we go. So 201 years after his father's birth, Yosef dies. But we could put it this way. This is also how many years after Yaakov died. So Yaakov died when Yosef was 56. So 201, which is 56. We said 4 years after. You can put it back in the sun after Yaakov's. I have to do this now. Let's do this 54 years after Yaakov's death, 201 years after Yaakov's birth, 54 years after his death. We'll put it that way. Because his death. Get rid of this. Boom, perfect. Okay. Extend this out a bit. So Yosef lived. Yosef was 56 when his father died. He's 110 when he died. So that means he lived another 54 years after his father died. Basically, he was with his father. He was alive for half of his life, half of his life, his father was alive. But then again, we said only 34 years out of those 56 were they in direct contact with each other, because the rest of the time Yosef had disappeared. Okay, verse 23. וירא יוסף לאפרים בני שרישים, גם בני מכיר בן מנשה, ירדו על ברכי יוסף. So he saw his third generation. ויאמר יוסף אל אחיו, אנוכי מת, ואלוהים יפקוד אתכם והעלה אתכם מן הארץ הזאת אל הארץ אשר נשבע לאברהם, ליצחק וליעקב. וישבע יוסף את בני ישראל לאמור, we saw this before, פקוד יפקוד אלוהים אתכם והעליתם את עצמותיי מזה. Right, so get my bones out of here too. Nobody wants to be buried in Egypt, and we saw later that in Exodus 13, Moses fulfills this by taking Joseph's bones with him when the Israelites leave Egypt, and that's many generations later. That's amazing, keeping of this oath shows how loyal Moses and the Israelites were to the forefathers. וימת יוסף בן 110 שנים, ויחנתו אותו, ויישם בארון במצרים. So Joseph was not carried up to unlike his father, who was not immediately carried up and buried in the land of Israel. His bones were, and it says explicitly this, were put in a coffin in Egypt, because then later on we will see that Moses, as we said, will take those bones when the Israelites many generations later, 3 generations later or so, leave Egypt. And that's it. That's the end of Genesis chapter 50. That's the end of the book of Genesis. It has been a very long study, almost 4 hours, but a good study, I hope. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Amen. So, any comments before we go? If not, I'm going to end it. And I will say thank you all for joining me. And we're going to do this on a regular basis each week. I'm going to try from now on to put the announcement up a day before the study, because it gives more people time to kind of arrange it. And let's hope the study grows. Please invite your friends, invite your enemies, invite random people on the street, your frenemies, your ends, invite your ends. And that's it. So we'll talk to you soon. And I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.
Nay, nay, na, 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 nay. Nay,
Put the music on.
nay, nay, na, na, nay. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch, Leolam Va'ed. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch, Leolam Va'ed. והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד. הוי ננאי 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 נאי נאי ננאי נאי 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 נאי. השם מלך, השם מלך, השם ימלוך לעולם ועד. השם מלך, השם מלך, השם ימלוך לעולם ועד. והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, הוי והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי ננאי 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 נאי נאי ננאי נאי 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 אוי נאי 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 השם למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי ננאי 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 נאי 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 נאי